funhouse. Enter, if you dare, the world of an animatronic bear whose metallic heart beats with a thirst for justice, a hunger for revenge. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, connoisseurs of the macabre and seekers of the scandalous. Your voracious appetites for chilling narratives are about to be satiated by the heart-stopping, pulse-pounding creation of paranoid American and winged Sun comics. Abandoned in the dusty corners of amusement, now awoken in the murk of wickedness perpetrated by an evil elite. And this is not your childhood fairy tale, but a macabre dance of vindication, soaked in crimson, a symphony of screams echoing in the dimly lit chambers of malevolence. Be prepared for an onslaught of ghastly gore and titillating terror. A wicked waltz through twisted hallways and blood-stained basements where only the brave dare to tread. Quake at the bear's unyielding pursuit, cackle at the sharp and sardonic one-liners, shudder at the graphic, gratuitous scenes that harken back to the glory days of B-horror flicks. Frazzledrip Funhouse is your ticket to a thrill ride of terror. A carnival of carnage where the laughs are as loud as the screams. Uncover the truth beneath the rust and the blood, and remember, nothing is as it seems. Are you ready to step into the Frazzledrip Funhouse, where the animatronic eyes are always watching, and vengeance is a game that everyone can play? Get your backer exclusive cover on Indiegogo. For more information, visit paranoidamerican.com.
Constantly explore the view of possibilities. Come true, so what we do is call out to the good guys. Good guys, good guys, good guys. Witches, weirdos, bigamists, entertaining, calming linguists. Good guys. Forum of decorum needs a secretive society to advance on philosophies, intentionally, magically good guys, good guys, good guys, good guys. Witches, weirdos, mischief making. It's okay to change your thinking. Good guys. Good guys, good guys.
Big up yourself. Welcome back to another episode of the Secret Society of Good Guys. We are happy to join you. How are you tonight, good guys?
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Phillip.
Happy to be here.
Induct you into the Good Guys. After the show, you can decide how you would like that to take place. But until then, you are here to tell us all the gory and not so gory details of the Mafia, the mob, the family.
And
Welcome.
we've decided
Thank
the
you.
initiation is you either get jumped in or you get sexed in, right? Those are the two. So
We
you
don't
can
have to
figure
tell
out through the course of this, you can kind of figure out which way you want to lean.
As long as it doesn't involve the Bidens, I'm good. You know.
The big guy.
Yeah, no big guy. No pedo Pete for me.
Not even 10%.
Nope.
How are you guys doing? What's new this week?
Right.
What's
I'm echoey.
you
I
sound
don't know,
fine.
really. What's new this week? What's new?
I got something new. I just got these in today.
Oh God.
This
That's
is
awesome.
actually and you said and I've got this new life like Gordy that you can just have it delivered directly to your house. It's a sticker sheet that the artwork's actually done by an artist named Spider, and their artwork is incredibly amazing. And you can almost see, like, here's the back of my little Biden party pack. So there's the real Hunter Biden, right? Can you even tell the difference? It's like the same. It's the same picture.
Oh God,
it
yeah.
not?
That's good.
It's
And
the
it even
same
comes
guy.
with the fronts, and the fronts will fit perfectly on top of the sticker
I
here.
love
But you got a
it.
crack pipe, you got some crack, maybe some coke. There's the infamous laptop. Yeah, there's a gun because he's got to have the gun. Someone did point out that there's no red scarf, and now I feel like an idiot for not including a red scarf. What am I doing with my life? So,
I wonder, how the Biden Mafia came to be. Like, when did it start with the Biden Mafia? Because I think it's a mafia. Like, these politicians we have today. Like,
I'm down to do
these
a deep
last
dive on the
names.
Bidens.
They definitely. I mean, don't they seem kind of like small potatoes, though?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, of course. It's our
I'd
president.
say they're
So funny.
no bigger or smaller than like the Kennedy family.
Right.
The Bidens versus the Kennedys. I feel like they're smaller.
Well,
They're
because
smaller than
when Jackie finally left JFK, I forgot what happened to him, but they broke up somehow, and she ended up going out with the Onassis family, right? Aristotle Onassis. And when she transitioned, it was like I can't remember the exact quote, but it was like she didn't know what money was until she was with Onassis, and it made the Kennedys look like freaking bumpkins that were clipping coupons for Walmart. Like it was such a separation and magnitudes of order difference that I think the Kennedys are small potatoes too, if we're talking like world stage.
Well, Clinton family, Clinton crime family, the Bush crime family, I think beats both of them.
Well, they can both afford planes that don't blow up or just crash in midair, right? I always assume just because the Kennedy family, there's no curse, they just cheaped out on all of their airlines and the security detail. Maybe just pay a little extra.
That's what happens when you appoint a friend to your security and your FAA flight navigation guy that just is supposed to do your checklist for you because he's not doing it himself, is he? You think?
We have people that do
I
that
don't know.
now.
Yeah.
I don't know why they. Yeah, I don't know why they call it a mafia when it's, families and their last names and their clans. So they call it mafia, but I want to know who gave them the name mafia. Was it a government issued name? Because what I understand is just to be families. Like back home where I'm from, like villages were a mafia.
So
Like, it's like a last name and a last name and a last name, and they were the ones who ran the town instead of the government. So it's like, when did the government come over, and when the government do a government takeover on the mafia and take that title for themselves? Like, literally, it's what it is. That's what government is mafia to me, at least. I don't know about everybody else, but that's how I view it.
Well, the mafia, came over here from Sicily. Sicily was where it is established, but for the most part in Sicily, they're not called, it's more like the villages. Like one of the most infamous mafia groups in Sicily is the Corleonesi, which is, Corleone, and they're considered the bumpkins, but at the same time, they're the most ruthless mafia clan. The two great mafia wars in Sicily were in the 60s and in the 1980s. In the 1980s, that war killed over, I believe it was 1,000 by the time it was done. And two of the bosses from Sicily, a guy named Tommaso Buscetta, because they were killing like his sons, they were killing everybody connected to him, wound up hiding out. I think he was in Brazil. He was in South America when he was eventually caught and extradited and then became a government informant. And then there was a guy named Gaetano Badalamenti. He was hiding out. He got busted for the pizza connection case, which was heroin importation in the United States through pizza parlors all over, specifically more like New York, New Jersey, PA, I think even Illinois, like some the
original
small
gate
town
of pizza.
Huh.
Yeah, there's
will you
weird
do me
stuff.
one favor in this episode, Philip? Just because I know
Mhm.
you know it too. If you mention anyone like the Corleone family, will you
Mhm.
say that would be the Godfather? Or like, will you make the Hollywood connection for
Oh
my
God, yeah,
silly little brain?
Yeah,
Okay.
for me too. Yeah.
yeah.
Because I know all these movies, the more I look at, like, you think like Donnie Brasco or these kind of things, or The Departed. I watched The Departed probably 10 times before I got that it was like a Whitey Bulger thing. like,
Yeah.
like those are all the movies that you see over and over again that you don't realize that, oh, this mafia movie's true.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's crazy. So you know what? I'll start off randomly. So considering the fact that with what Thomas showed with the design with the Hunter Biden thing, and it said Spider, we can talk Goodfellas because Spider, was the one that Joe Pesci shot, the one who messed up his drink order, who may or may not have been a real person at one point. That was actually alleged. 2 days from now, it'll be the 45th anniversary of the Lufthansa heist that the Henry Hill and his associates. Henry Hill wasn't actually involved in it, but he'd given the tip. This group was based out of Ozone Park in Queens, and it was called the Roberts Lounge Crew, but it was headed by Jimmy Burke, who Robert De Niro played in Goodfellas, Jimmy Conway. And, they pulled off the heist December 11th, 1978. The Lufthansa terminal. They got away with I think they said between $5 and $8 million between cash and jewels. And within days, the NYPD and the FBI, they knew who it was. A guy named Stax Edwards, who Samuel L. Jackson plays in the movie, was supposed to go take the van that they used and get it compacted, just get rid of it. He decided instead he liked it too much. It looked good. And he went to his girlfriend's place, got stoned. And within about a day, the cops found it, got prints off it. And Stax was dead a week later. And basically, number one, being dumb. And number two, going into the lounge afterwards and being like, so when am I getting some of my Mafia money? He thought, he was owed something from it. And, within the next couple of weeks, they'd start more and more people would start getting killed in relation. Some was because of the threats that they talk, and there was the other fact that maybe Jimmy Burke just didn't want to share any of the money. And like Henry Hill got $10,000. They said the Gambinos, because of their control of Kennedy Airport, got a kick. And Paul Vario, who was the captain, that's who Paul Sorvino played in Goodfellas, Paulie. He got a portion, but everything else Jimmy Burke kept, and they've never found a dime of that money. And I think it was about 13 people got killed over about like 3-4 years.
And Layla was pointing out, like, so much of our governments are just the mafia. How often are they working with the governments to, like, kind of write off stuff like this? They do a big heist that's diamonds or gold or whatever, and everybody knows exactly what's going on, like a Pearl Harbor or 9/11. It's just like, it's almost set up. This guy has the door set up, so it's all like an insurance wash or a reason to heighten security or a new reason for the FBI to
Almost
be
like
there.
a form of piracy too. It's like them like doing the dirty work and then the government coming in and then taking over whatever the hard work that the mobsters did, like steal whatever cash or gold or whatever the case may be.
Well,
pretty interesting.
You got to think. So in our country, so before there was a mafia, when you still had the Irish were very prominent in organized crime, and you had in New York, you had the 5 Points area, and you had groups like the Plug Uglies and the Dead Rabbits. All these groups, they had partnerships with Tammany Hall, and Tammany Hall was like the political machine in the city. It was mostly Democratic. I think there might have been some Republicans in there, but for the most part, it was mostly Democratic. That was kind of like an early partnership. They show that in Gangs of New York, a little bit of that. And that was like written, that came out, like the book came out in like 1927. But then, the movie with DiCaprio and what's his name? Daniel Day-Lewis, that was like early 2000s. That kind of gave a little bit of a glimpse. I want to say the modern day partnership between more aspects of our government was probably cut around when I believe it was the Office of Naval Intelligence approached Lucky Luciano, who was doing his time for the running a prostitution ring, or basically profiting from it in World War II, to help safeguard the New York docks. And they reached out to him. I believe they reached out. It was initially, I think it was through, might have been Meyer Lansky, but they wanted to make sure that the New York docks were safeguarded. And let's face it, the mob ran the docks. I mean, they ran the Fulton Fish Market. There was so many areas of business in New York City, amongst other parts of the 5 boroughs, that were being controlled by the mafia at that point.
Were we safer when the mafia controlled everything?
That's what I was gonna ask. Was the mafia, like, before it became criminal? Was it like I would say, not sheriffs, but weren't they like the people who were in charge of the towns and helped the community in a sense with jobs and union and all of that?
There was aspects of that, but there was also aspects of, hey, like one thug or hoodlum, breaks, the storefront window, and then someone says the next day, hey, I heard something happened. If you maybe kick back a little bit for protection, it won't happen again. And then maybe if the person had looked deep enough, they'd find out the guy who broke the window is connected to the guy who offered protection. So it was, I think there was some benevolence, but there's always like a price to be paid. I think in the end, it was always about, just the criminal empire and making money. And crime didn't become organized until Prohibition. It was very disorganized before then. And then Prohibition comes in and lasts for 13 years. And you start seeing a bloodletting for control of the alcohol. And you see that in Chicago. That's how Al Capone comes out on top, but for how long? In the long run, not that long. New York, you had what wound up being, it was called the Castellammarese War, which was really like a territorial, like where people were from sort of war, that ended with, it was between two guys, Salvatore Maranzano and a guy named Joe Masseria. His nickname was Joe the Boss. And on the other side, you had Joe Bonanno, young Joe Bonanno. You had Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, Bugsy Siegel, Meyer Lansky. Masseria was a huge bigot, was not a fan of Jews being anywhere near the Italians, as well as not liking people from the area of Castellammare del Golfo in Italy. And the war was so costly that the Young Turks, the young guys, like Luciano, they decided to take out Masseria. And that was a group that included, I think it was Vito Genovese, Albert Anastasia, I think Bugsy Siegel as well, took out Masseria after him and Luciano were having like a big lunch. Luciano goes, I'm going to go to the bathroom. They're playing cards, and Masseria
was Genovese. I'm sorry, was Genovese part of that whole Genovese pharmacy store throughout New York City?
I always wondered that. Nothing I've ever heard concrete about that. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a relation.
Because I grew up in New York City. Yep. I used to go to Genovese. So
I worked at a Genovese, so yeah. Yeah, no,
interesting.
Not as far as I know. Not as far as I know.
Okay.
But
so the Italian mafia is so famous, but every country kind of has a mafia, right? Like the Irish mafia is kind of known, and then the Jewish mafia is like, obvious, but even all the way back when, and the Albanian mafia, is there like a Hollywood mafia, Vegas mafia, or is it this all East Coast stuff that they spread out like districts?
Florida mafia.
There was called at one point like open cities. Like Vegas was considered open. They didn't want, once it was really like until Bugsy Siegel County came out and with the Flamingo and took that over, there really wasn't any organized crime out there. And then even when the mob realized how much money they could make, and obviously once they got rid of Siegel, and they didn't kill him in Vegas. He was in LA. He was at Virginia Hill, his one-time mistress and girlfriend's house when he got shot, and that was kind of a decree. Nobody gets killed, in Vegas. Try to keep, the street crime with, respective crews out of there. But yeah, it was considered to be an open city, and I think even Florida, there was aspects of Florida that, like Miami, was supposed to be an open area. But yeah, so Hollywood, that got taken over. Like Siegel
So
was
there
out there.
really was a time if you were in a like family and you're like, oh my gosh, it's killing. You have to look over your shoulder every day. But if you needed to take a break and go on vacation, you really could go to Florida or Vegas and be like, I don't have to look over my shoulder here. We all have a deal. Like you could run into somebody at a card table or laying on a beach and you're like, you're lucky that this rule doesn't exist.
Well, I mean, some of the wise guys have had like winter homes in Florida. I mean, Al Capone did. That's where he died of syphilis. He was vacationing down in Florida. Had no idea who he was anymore. That was that whole, I think that Tom Hardy movie where he played Capone was like towards the end, whether anything he was saying made sense or whatnot, because his brain was pretty much rotted out. But yeah, you had guys that Meyer Lansky lived down there for a while.
Almost like the government where they have these homes out in Antarctica and stuff just to go into hiding.
Well, I was going to say maybe that was at the villages. That sounds like something that would happen at the villages.
Yeah. But so with Hollywood, so Bugsy Siegel was between Vegas and also LA, where he's doing screen tests. He's good friends with George Raft, who was a one-time kind of like hanger-on, knock-around guy, but then became an actor. In Bugsy, it was what's his name? Joe Mantegna was George Raft, and George Raft was in Scarface. He was in the original Scarface.
Did Bugsy ended up dating one of was it the Andrews sisters or something?
That was Jane Connor, and that was Phyllis McGuire.
Oh, okay, the McGuire sisters.
Yeah. Siegel was at one point he was married, but he was seeing a woman who was connected to the Italian fascist government, Countess de Frasso, who I think her husband was like had the ear of Mussolini. And at one point, Siegel, considering how fictionalized Bugsy was, that movie, him trying to get Mussolini killed is true. That was something he was hoping to do at one point. So
that's what Joe says. That's what all the Bonanos say is why Joe left was because of Mussolini.
Yeah.
Why the Bonanos ended up here. Yeah.
Look how much swag Bugsy Siegel has.
I wish men still dressed like this.
I just like those kind of eyebrows. Like where he's like
what was it? You gotta get that.
Those caterpillars.
Yeah. The Robert De Niro look.
Yeah, like that guy, he's like, if I saw that guy, I'd be like, I remember when he used to shine my shoes, spit shine them.
Made him look like mirrors.
Forget about it.
Spit shine Tommy.
Look at that suit there.
Yeah,
Black and white suit. You can shop.
It almost seems like the way to get power like that, though, is you just have to be cold-hearted and ruthless. Like, if you don't stop to question anything and just rely on your like, that guy's crazy. That it's almost like that is the power.
It is, but it's also a huge worry.
Oh, you're always looking over your shoulder. I mean, it's not. I mean, like when we were talking about always looking over your shoulder in an area where now it's an open city. But no, in the mob, you're always, to a degree, I think you have to have a healthy degree of paranoia, And that was a great line in Donnie Brasco, like when early in the movie when Pacino thinks he's going to get killed, Lefty, and in the end he's being walked in to be given a lion by Michael Madsen's character, Sonny Black. And he's like, in this thing, you go in alive, you come out dead, and it's your best friend who did it. That's the world you live in. I mean, there's been brothers on it, like in the Philly mob, there was brothers on opposing sides in a mob war. I mean, it's, it seems like something out of fiction, but I mean, that happened. And one wound up getting paralyzed, and I think the other one was killed. So it's, I think you have to be. I mean, and to be honest, what was it in The Sopranos? That and also wanting to avoid getting caught. The spotlight is why Tony, I think, at one point let Uncle Junior be the assumed boss of the family while he kind of like hung back a little bit. And that's how someone like Vinny the Chin in the Genovese family managed. They had no idea he was the boss. He was thought to be literally crazy. He was known as being he was a boxer. He was a boxer for a while. I don't know when exactly he got mixed up in the rackets. One of his brothers became a mobster, and his other brother was a priest. So, and another one almost seems like good enough for a movie right there on a plot alone. And Vinny the Chin took the shot that wounded Frank Costello and convinced Frank Costello to retire. But of course, it's because he said, "This is for you, Frank." Costello turns around and the bullet grazes his head. And at the trial, Costello kept the vow of omerta, said, "I don't recognize the man who shot me." And then afterwards, Gigante shook his hand and said, "Thank you, Frank." And years down the line, Gigante, I think, had been charged with bribing, I think it was a 5-man police station. And he pled insanity. And that's when it started. And then he started walking around Greenwich Village like this, bathrobe and everything, mumbling to himself. At one point, agents were tailing him. He basically booked it back to his apartment, went into his shower, fully clothed with an umbrella, and the agents came in and followed him into his apartment and see him doing this act. And that worked. I mean, because in the 80s, when they had the commission trial, they nailed all the bosses of the New York families. And they're like, "Oh, who's the Genovese family boss?" "Fat Tony Salerno." They said Fat Tony, who they'd used that for The Simpsons. Joe Mantegna's character was based off of Fat Tony Salerno. And the entire time was Vincent the Chin Gigante. Like, I think from the 70s through a good portion of the 80s, they had the boss wrong the entire time.
You know what's interesting about this whole mafia idea and how they run things? It reminds me of, because I know I've talked about it just earlier and in other shows that we had, but the whole idea, I guess, since it started back in Sicily, we also have it in Albania, and it's almost like it's like I said, like you have your families who run the towns, and they have like the boss of the town. That's how it was in Albania. Like it's not like a governor, but it's like the head of the town. So it's like this huge family. If there were feuds or anything there, I mean, there's still blood feuds today, like where kids they're born into it, where they can't leave their house because there's a hit on the family name, and the next person in the bloodline to come into the bloodline is to go. So the whole idea, how I see the mafia being, is they're trying to, I guess they tried to bring that when they came from Italy here, to have that whole family system going here, but it had to turn criminal because that was the only way to survive here with the type of governments that we had here. So in a sense, turned criminal because back home, they didn't have to be criminal, but people respected and feared these families just because of their name and how intelligent they were, who they knew. It wasn't really violent at the time. But when it needed to be, it was, because of things that happened between families. Someone looked at somebody's wife or said somebody's wife, or whatever the case may be. So they tried to implement that here, but they had to turn criminal, I guess, because of the lifestyle that America had to offer. So they had to turn criminal, I think. Because that's what it
criminal is
reminds
just
me
a
of.
word. Criminal
Yeah.
is just a word. So like the
Or
government
anarchy.
the government doesn't like when you deal drugs, but they'll
Yeah.
come in and deal the drugs.
Yes.
And then they'll arrest you enough until they are like, Layla Goldguns has a little power, and we want to bring this new drug in called crack or meth or whatever. And this will split up this part of the neighborhood, almost like voting. Like they're like, let's meander, like jerry rig lines. And so then they're like, they put these certain drugs, and I think that breaks up the family a lot too. Because every single one of these characters that you see in any of these mafia movies, addiction seems to be somewhere in their downfall. Addiction, or a lady with an addiction.
Yeah, well,
That's exactly it. It's the addiction thing, and I know this personally. So, can I tell my story?
yeah.
I would love it.
Check this out. So, when I was a kid, my stepdad told me the story about the mafia, right? His dealings. He's like, so he ran this janitorial service in the 60s and 70s. At night, and he would do this for restaurants, and one of those was Tucson Gardens. It was a big restaurant here in Tucson, and it was owned by Colonel Sanders' son. Colonel Sanders' son who Colonel Sanders himself was a raging alcoholic, and so
And
also
obsessed
was
with
his son.
chicken.
And,
Sorry.
you know, I say. I don't know. Did he sound like he didn't sound like that?
And an
That's
American
my picture,
hero,
too.
I'll have you all know.
Raging
Just,
Canuck.
while we're
Foghorn
also talking
Leghorn.
about American hero.
American hero. Okay, I don't know. Is that connected?
White on white suit.
Anyway, so so this guy, Colonel Sanders' son, he goes missing every once in a while. It's not abnormal for the businesses for that to happen, right? So for maybe like a couple days or a week, even though he owns and runs the restaurant, and the Mafia owned a lot of restaurants in town, so it was a very normal thing because the Bonanos landed here in Tucson, and they owned at least Little Abner's and Club 21 and all these ones that are pretty much gone now or changed hands. But they owned, so what's his name owned this one. He disappears for a little while, and then everybody starts wondering what's happened to so-and-so. I can't remember his name. Anyway, he disappears and nobody gets paid. They're trying to run the restaurant and they're kind of running it into the ground. They finally have to close one day. That some suits show up, right? Like, we're going to take care of you. Don't everybody relax. You know, pinstripes and stuff, right? Sits everybody down in a booth and calls my stepdad in. Lee, we know we owe you a lot of money. So you know where our bar is. You know where our stash is. You take what you think is fair. And, you know, we can go our separate, we'll be equal. We'll be square, right? So that happened. And then Tucson Gardens closed down for a while. And when I was a kid, I still have some in the garage. We had cases upon cases of boxes of Crown Royal with the velvet bags. And I still have some of those left today because I kept stuff in them, you know. As a kid, I had thousands of them.
Those are cop magnets, by the way. Those are absolute cop magnets.
I bet.
That's still where I keep my garbage pail, kids.
I keep my weed supplies in there.
They know. They know.
They
about
know. They're hip.
The rumor was this guy, he was kidnapped and went to, like, somebody kidnapped him to Mexico, right? And I found a link to Colonel Harlan Sanders in 1974. The FBI had some sort of tie-in with him from a FOIA request that was tied to some sort of mafia thing, right? And in this thing said that he had death threats. But the rumor that I heard, and from my stepdad and around Tucson lore, is that that dude had so much debt to the mafia that they kept him alive for a little while, and then he just disappeared. Probably drank himself to death, but in hiding somewhere. Probably because he owed too much money. But
Well, that's so.
who knows?
What is it? Witness protection seems to be an end for a lot of the mafia people.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the Bodanos went into witness protection because Joey himself wrote the book telling them how everything was
Man of honor. Yeah, that's how.
Yeah, the man of honor.
That's how Giuliani used. That was his blueprint for the commission trial.
Yep.
Because to be honest, that was Joe Bonanno's revenge. Joe Bonanno got banished to Arizona. I mean, like Gordy was saying, the Bananas were established in Arizona. Joe's son, Salvatore, they called him Bill. Bill stayed out in Arizona because I think he had like really bad, like an ear condition, something like that. In Arizona, the air was supposed to be better for him and that. But at some point in the 60s, number one, he wants Bill to be his consigliere, which, people didn't like the favoritism on that. And then Bonanno allegedly plotted to kill Carlo Gambino, Tommy Lucchese, I think even Sam Giancana. So like 3 or 4 different bosses. And he was called to account for that. And then when he's supposed to face a grand jury in an unrelated matter, he disappears for over a year. He's kidnapped by, I believe it was his cousin, Stefano Magaddino, who was the boss up in Buffalo, and eventually comes back. And then they're like, yeah, we're not going to kill you, but you're gone. You're out. And which is really a lot of respect they showed him, because in the end, they could have easily just had him whacked out at that point. He was the last of the original bosses, because after Joe Masseria was killed, and they took care of Salvatore Maranzano, I think it was 5 months later, they established the five families were established, and then what would be the ruling commission. And so that things wouldn't be another bloodletting for the most part. Like outside of intra-family issues, there really hasn't been any like family warring against each other. Like that's kind of been, for the most part, ended. And really, they didn't want New York to become what Chicago was. Like everyone talks about Al Capone with St. Valentine's Day, and they were looking to, a lot of the stuff I've read said they were looking to kill Capone for that, because the amount of heat it brought. And he got arrested on a gun charge and winds up, I think was in jail for a little bit of time. But then afterwards, only had another year or two ruling, and then they got him in the tax evasion case. But the 5 families, Bonanno was the initial boss. None of the other, the rest of the guys were all like up and comers in their own families. Like Gambino didn't, take over till 57. And that was after the assassination of Albert Anastasia. Genovese didn't take over until 57 also. And that was after having Costello shot, before it became the Colombo family. It was the Profaci family. And Tommy Lucchese, I think, came in, I think it was like I want to say 40s or 50s, Gagliano.
Do you think they go directly against the Catholic Church? Or do you think like the Catholic Church is a whole different, like they're all Catholic, but there seems to be like a competing mafia in a way?
Well, so
because a lot of them are heavily religious.
Oh God. So Joe Profaci at one point had, I think there's a certain thing like, yes, there's kind of trying to reconcile their criminal behavior, and still try to be spiritual. Joe Profaci wound up like donating heavily to his church and bought like this gaudy, I think it was like jewels to put on like some sort of religious statues at their church, and they went missing. And, as the expression went, inquiries were made, and eventually the items were returned, and allegedly whoever was involved, I think it was like a couple guys, were killed, and brutally so. In terms of the church, well,
it just seems like a lot of those guys would have gotten diddled by these priests and then gotten older and been mafia members and been like, that's nonsense. Like, I'm surprised there wasn't a direct war with the Italian mob and the Vatican.
Well, so I can't really say, the United States, there really hasn't been too much, relationship. I would say more Sicily, and you can go with the outgrowths of World War II. You can go Gladio with that, with the CIA, the Vatican. It's the least liked of the Godfather movies, but Godfather 3 gets into aspects with the whole thing with the Vatican Bank
Is it true that Donald Trump directed The Godfather?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
Not that I'm aware of. No.
I
His
heard some
name-
shit.
His name
part
actually
of-
does show up in Godfather 3 in one of the headlines when they're talking about the Corleone family trying to take over Immobiliare, which was like this Vatican controlled company or whatnot. And Trump's name is in one of the headlines, which I always thought was kind of funny at the time. But nothing that I'm aware of. I mean, The Godfather, I'm still watching that, The Offer, the background of the making of The Godfather and how that almost got derailed by the Italian American Civil Rights League, which was run by Joe Colombo, which was a kind of sham in and of itself. And I mean, Mario Puzo, who wrote The Godfather, wrote it to pay off gambling debts. He was heavily in debt. He was from Hell's Kitchen. And his agent said, you know, you're making some money with your books, but not much. It's like, write what you know. And the mob guys, you know.
How was the Italian American Club a sham? Because I always understood them as the ones that were, I guess, fighting the mafia sort of like stereotype. But also, I've also heard they were the last bastion for Chris Columbus. And then once the Italian American clubs dissipated, Chris Columbus turns into a bad guy.
Are we talking, I mean, the Civil Rights League, or are we talking, you know?
Well, the Italian American Club, I think is separate from the Civil Rights League, but it has the same essential intent. Like the Italian American clubs, they were basically like little groups in each town. It was like a safe haven. It was almost like if you treated all the Italians as like Freemasons or something, like they could all have like this little like refuge. Usually we're in like little Italian restaurants that would like double up as you know, like extra spaces and stuff. But I was always, I mean, growing up as an Italian Catholic, that was always taught like these are the ones that are making sure that like Columbus's name like stays in good, you know, candor. And then all of a sudden it's like those places get phased out. I know all the ones that were in my town all like basically shuttered because it didn't really have a place after the year 2000. It felt like.
Yeah,
there's an Italian American club in my town still.
Really?
Yeah, Italian American Social Club. Yeah, they were all over the place in my town.
Still.
Any mafia ties at all to Italian American clubs?
I was gonna ask
Phillip,
Phillip, are you tied to any like sort of mafia ancestors or anything?
Taking the oath?
You seem to know a lot.
You seem to know a lot about this.
No, it's I watched The Godfather at an early age. I've heard, you know, a lot of stories. It's funny enough, watching old home movies from my dad's side of the family, he pointed out one of his uncles and he was like, oh, he was definitely mobbed up. But it wasn't like anything where it was like he knew for sure, but he was like, yeah, he's definitely mobbed up. And Long Beach, where I was from, I mean, that's where they set The Godfather. You know, that's where the Corleones lived, was Long Beach. The city of Long Beach did not want what they called that element filming there, and because it's very heavily prejudiced, unfortunately, against Italians. But there was some mobsters who summered in Long Beach, and it's one of the two cities on Long Island. It's nice. And what's his name? Billy Crystal, who lived in Long Beach. He always talks the story about his father get his car getting rear-ended by a guy named John Ormento, who was a big shot in the Lucchese family, big drug dealer actually. And Ormento saying, "Oh, we could buy you a new car and this and that," and Billy Crystal's dad just being like, "No, just give me the damages or whatnot, nothing fancy or whatnot." And Billy Crystal being bummed out that they could have gotten something nice. One of my dad's cousins, so like one of my second cousins, I think it was his prom date or one of his dates was the daughter of a guy named John Diogardi. His name was Johnny Dio. They reference him in Goodfellas. He's the one with
this so you can say that
Dio
she
Gardi,
held up the devil symbol, but really it's just
last,
the Ronnie James Dio. Sorry.
Diogardi last name is
Diogardi.
Diogardi last name is actually an Italian Albanian last name. It's the Arbrish. The Albanians that live in Italy in the town called Arbrish, and they have like, I guess, their own little mafia there as well. There's like an Italian Albanian mafia in Italy, in this ancient part of Italy, but it still goes on today.
I'm going to give two quick Albanian asides. One, John Gotti Jr., the guy who was kind of like his, he was supposedly close enough to him. John Alight, was Albanian.
Yeah,
and
he was crazy.
Yeah, well, and what's her name?
Crazy.
Hates him. Victoria Gotti.
Yeah,
he said they had a relationship. She's like, no, they didn't.
they probably did, because Albanian men really don't lie about that shit.
Yeah, and if you, I mean, I'm sure everybody here. I'm going to take a chance and say that everybody knows about the group, what's called the Octopus.
I've heard this.
Enlighten us about the octopus.
What's
Yeah,
the
if you can,
writer?
Maybe we should stop and like have like little background of certain things, like maybe Q&A, because you could probably steer us everywhere.
Before we go into the octopus, I just want to talk about Abby for a second.
Yes.
Oh, please, yes.
So
Please.
Abby isn't here right now because she is getting her pro card. She is in the middle of competition. And so I would say I would embarrass her by showing her this, but she was on stage. So
She looked amazing.
yeah, I feel like you guys should see it. So this is Abby on stage with her physique for women's fitness, I think was her competition. And yeah.
She looks great.
She
Oh my
looks so
god.
awesome.
Certified badass.
Hell yeah, Abby.
Yeah, I miss her. I can't wait to hear all the details about this, but like she manifested this for her whole life, and now she's on stage doing this thing in 2 years from a time that she was just like chilling on her couch and wanted to get rid of cellulite in her ass. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, look at her ass.
Yeah. Wow.
So I just wanted to big up Abby real quick, and that is why she's not here.
You go, girl. We love you.
So we'll find out details next week.
Amazing.
Or maybe she'll hop in
Maybe.
chat and say hello.
I was gonna go there too this weekend, but I had like a little head cold, so I ended up not getting on stage.
I couldn't get my tan in time.
Yeah.
That would have
In
been
2
awesome.
years, though, man, that's amazing.
Yeah,
I
awesome.
do want to sneak a question in, just or maybe a couple out of left field, because I don't think there's ever going to be like a natural segue into either of these questions. So one of them, I feel like this one is just complete BS, but I'm interested if there's a source or even a smidgen of truth to that Mafia was originally named after Giuseppe Mazzini, and that it stood for Mazzini authorizes, and then it was like arson, killing, and something else. But that it started from Mazzini, and Mazzini was kind of like an Italian revolutionary that had infiltrated a bunch of different like political groups and kind of became sort of like a, I guess like a folk hero in like a strange way. But the full official rumor is that he kind of got like this handover from the Carbonari, and that the Mafia originally started as the Carbonari, which was an Italian secret society named after so, because they would meet in the middle of the woods and they would burn charcoal for light and to kind of like discuss. And this is apparently where some of the original rituals came into play, like burning the cards and doing any sort of like blood pacts. So I feel like there's maybe like a 20% chance that this is like legitimate, but I hear it repeated so often that I would love to just hear if you've ever even heard any of this before, specifically Mazzini and Carbonari in relation to Mafia.
I think, you know what, I might have actually come across it, but nothing that I can really, like 100%. The one story I used to hear, and this is probably like more mythical, was it had to do with, because Italy and Sicily were like constantly the source of like invasions for like thousands of years, and whether it be the French or just so many other different countries that invaded at a point, the Moors, all these countries, or groups I should say, that a young girl was raped, and that the girl's mother screamed Mafia, which was supposed to be like, I think supposed to be like her daughter or something like that. And that, eventually like she was looking for justice, and it kind of came out of that. But I think that's trying to maybe attribute it maybe more nobility, than, like a more noble cause than it actually was. But then again, in Sicily, they were called men of honor, men of respect. There was sort of a looking out for each other, even though there was the criminality to it. But yeah, I think I did read something where it was Mazzini being kind of a figure of controversy in Italy, as a revolutionary anyway. But that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, truth be told, I think so much that we think we know, like in these books, and I've read a ton of mob books, and I still want to read more because I feel like there's always more out there. Only gives us a glimpse. I think there's one, because you're reading it from so many different angles. So much could just be bullshit. It could just be okay, well, this, I can read one book that's written by an FBI agent. Well, they're always going to be looking out for the Bureau and themselves. They might not want to tell the whole story. You get a mobster who writes, a tell-all. Who is he looking out for? He's looking out for himself. He's looking out to sell a book, like Sammy Gravano's book, Underboss, that he told to Peter Moss was a self-serving autobiography. It was not a bad book, but I said, it makes you wonder, how much is true, how much is, just kind of bragging, and, just how much is maybe covering something else.
Weird story. Isn't there a story of one of the mobsters, and he had a lot of power, and after the capsule went to the moon, he had the capsule dropped off to his kids' backyard so they could play in it for a while, and then he had it dropped off at a museum?
Really?
I've never heard that one either.
Yeah.
Cool. I feel like it was the same dude who was with the McGuire sister.
Giancana?
Yeah, something it was some kind of something that was going to a museum, some weird thing that should have never been in somebody's house. And on the drive, he knew the truck driver, so he had it swung by his house and unloaded, and his kids got to play in it.
I mean, Giancana, when he was the boss of the Chicago outfit, wielded a lot of power. I mean, to the point when years later they would try to say that he was involved when the whole mob killed Kennedy aspect of the Kennedy assassination. He was always one of the key figures pointed out. Him, Carlos Marcello, who was the New Orleans mob boss, and Santo Traficante, who was the mob boss of Tampa. But Giancana had a lot of power, and he did have a lot of access. But again, talking about stuff where it's after the fact, what's really true and what's kind of...
Or you're just building lore on this monster.
So I did a little etymology on mafia, and it comes from mafioso. And it's in the original term came from Sicily, mafioso, signifying a bully, arrogant, but also fearless, enterprising, and proud. Gambetta, who favors as the Arabic source of the adjective marfud, rejected.
But also bully, for the first time I heard it as bull, just because of the Ronnie James Dio bull that I brought up earlier. It makes me wonder if the Dio isn't some kind of Italian thing to do with the bull, that they would show that as a hand signal to the other members of the gang.
I just want to go ahead, Gordy.
He says that his grandmother taught him that to ward off evil.
Yeah. So what if and he is, what is Ronnie James Dio? Is he Italian?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You got to point out too that the
I thought
Sicily,
this was ward off demons.
That's
What's
the
that
one
mean?
horned bull.
Ward off demons. Literally. Not I'm not kidding. This is for real. This is the actual sign to ward off demons.
There are monks that will walk around with their hands up like that.
I feel like you're just starting fights with demons at that point.
I know.
You're not
You're just being passive aggressive to demons. Hey, demon, you got something to say?
Hey, how come the Ghost Adventures hasn't figured that shit out yet? We just walk in like this. Hey, fuck you, Ghost. Come here, come get me. Come fucking get me.
There's all
Then you
this
just sit
source
back.
material for the mafia to come from Sicily, and Sicily was the key between essentially all of Europe and all of Africa. So it was this highly coveted thing, and for the longest time that was Phoenician area. That was Carthaginians.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence that's debatable. I don't know if anyone's fully committed to these, but that the survival of like these ancient bull worship kind of survived through that passage through Sicily, and it stuck around there, and it stayed at the north of Africa and like Tunisia, which is right where Carthage is or was essentially, and that kind of like maybe maintained, and that the modern day bull worship that still exists in Africa likely came from the Phoenicians that were brought it down through Sicily. So that this is like wild speculation and conjecture, but it's interesting because of the bull in particular.
Yeah,
it's true that Sicily was conquered mainly by the Moors, the Moorish.
And then you have that whole thing with the Maleficent is a Moorish queen, and she has the two horns, which would be how do you ward off demons? It's like, oh, you look like Maleficent. It's interesting.
Well, just a quick side note with the Moors in Sicily. That's I mean, I don't know how much you knew, but in the movie True Romance, the Quentin Tarantino scripted movie, with the scene with Dennis Hopper and Christopher Walken, and when Hopper is getting interrogated about who stole the drugs that Christian Slater ran off with, and he decides to tell where Sicilians, came from, and he said, they're spawned by, I'm not going to say it, but he's like, you guys were blonde hair, blue eyes, and then the Moors came, and he's like, now you look the way you are now, and he's like, and then goes from there. I mean, and it was a very conquered area, and so many areas were very.
True Romance is an underrated mafia.
Oh God,
movie.
yeah.
It's so good.
Fun fact: my favorite mafia movie would be Bronx Tale, and the high school scene is recorded at the high school that I went to, called William Cullen Bryant High School. So I actually tried looking for the staircase of where that scene where he was talking to his girl and like looking at his future girl out the window. So I was just oh my God, I went to the fucking same school where they recorded that movie. It's like small world. It was so crazy. I just saw a bulletin just walking past in the hallway. I was like, what the fuck?
Two things. Have you, because of that movie, and gentlemen, have you done that test to a girl? And because of that movie, as a woman, do you always make sure you undo if somebody gets your door? Do you always?
Yes, I do. I do. I do.
I do. I've done that.
If he's worth it,
because I always get the door. So I'm like, shabab.
Yeah. If he opens the car door for me, I'm doing that for him.
My favorite mafia movie is Goodfellas 1, but my favorite underrated mafia movie, and not everybody knows this one, it's My Blue Haven.
I love My Blue Haven.
It's so
love
good.
That.
And it's like Rick Moranis. Yeah, Steve Martin is like the guy in witness protection, and Rick Moranis is like his FBI agent. And it's just fantastic and silly, and it's like kind of a underrated one.
Do you know the connection with My Blue Heaven and Goodfellas? So My Blue Heaven was written by Nora Ephron, who would write, I think she wrote When Harry Met Sally. I know she wrote Sleepless in Seattle. Nora Ephron was with Nicholas Pileggi, who wrote Wise Guy with Henry Hill. That would be the basis for Goodfellas. Wow. And Henry Hill was always hard up for money. He was in the middle of nowhere, witness protection, even though he got kicked out a couple times of towns because he kept giving up his identity. And at one point, he's like, certain stories he recognized in My Blue Heaven. He's like, she took part of my life. Like, he got pissed. And meanwhile, I was like, well, shit, you already got money from your one movie. And it's like, and you got cash advances from Nick Pileggi, but he wanted money from My Blue Heaven also. Like, part of that was Henry Hill's life. And I mean, because look at the houses. Like when Steve Martin moves into Freiburg in Southern California, some of those houses sort of look like where Henry Hill winds up at the end of Goodfellas.
Yeah, and he walks out and he's just like a regular old schmuck.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so funny now that you mentioned it. You could almost watch Goodfellas and then watch My Blue Heaven afterward.
Oh,
that's perfect.
Oh, yep. God, I haven't seen that in a long time.
That's perfect. Chef's kiss.
Is there a more accurate movie out of all the mafia movies? Is there one that's like that's the closest one to how things operate?
I would say Goodfellas is probably as close as you'd get. and people look down a little bit, don't appreciate as much Casino, Scorsese's later movie, because it's, but it's about the mob too. But I would say Goodfellas, Donnie Brasco too, because even though it's about, an undercover agent, you see Lefty, you see Pacino's life in that. And yeah, guys who are like soldiers, like a lot of them are just scraping to get by. They're not always making like huge amounts of money. Like when John Gotti plotted the hit on Paul Castellano was living in what they called the White House in Staten Island, this huge mega mansion where people would have to go pay tribute to him. And, it was on a place called Tote Hill, which I think there's like a death relation to that name or something. There was something weird that I'd seen about that. But they resented the amount of money that had to be kicked up to him while guys were trying to figure out a way to make money. And most of them wound up, eventually getting into the drug trade. I mean, and that's what happened with John Gotti's crew, is that his brother Gene and his lifelong friend Angelo Ruggiero had gotten involved with dealing heroin, and they get busted, and Paul Castellano hears that there's tapes, and he wants those tapes. And the fact that Ruggiero won't give him over eventually leads to John Gotti plotting to kill Castellano in return.
This is not a silly question to me. Somebody wrote, are the Kardashians mafia? And I've wondered if there were any like high up women in the mafia at any time. Like we hear about Bonnie and Clyde, but they're really just robbing banks. Are they mafia? So it's just like
Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah, like we know these like heads of state and things like that. But
Hillary?
I mean, is there
Hillary Clinton?
Hillary?
Pelosi,
Hillary
right?
Hilton?
Weren't the
Isn't
Pelosi's?
the Pelosi family, aren't they a high mafia?
Yeah, I would
wouldn't
say.
surprise me. Not come across in terms of anything I've read, but it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. I mean, you just think about it. If you, it's your own modern kingdom, and the Pelosi's, it's, insider trading amongst other things. I don't really want to think about what Paul Pelosi gets into.
Hammer time.
Yeah. But yeah, no, with some of these, there's a book I have, and I was actually just looking at it today because I was trying to find a connection. I was trying to find a Disney connection, and I know there is one in some form. But a guy named Sidney Korshak, it was a book called Super Mob, and it was about like the elements that were above Italian organized crime, but somehow had that like veneer of respectability. And Sidney Korshak was like a labor lawyer, but he was Chicago mob connected. He had power, was able to kind of die on his own, natural causes or whatnot. But he was a guy who was like the go-between for like so many different aspects between the legitimate world and organized crime. And to the point where he knew a lot of the people who figured in The Godfather. One of his good friends was Robert Evans, the movie producer, who would, suffer his own fall from grace from a cocaine addiction and eventually be unindicted co-conspirator in the Cotton Club murder. But yeah, Korshak wielded a lot of power, and you have guys like him who are kind of just managed to just kind of navigate both worlds. Or I'm trying to think of another one. There was a guy who was a mobster named Mo Dalitz, who was out of Cleveland, who managed to own and run the Desert Inn until Howard Hughes bought it. And Dalitz was called Mr. Vegas, and he winds up helping build, I think it was Sunrise. I think it was called Sunrise Hospital. Like he had his own wing dedicated to him in Vegas, to one of their hospitals. And people would ask him about his past life, but he was like, yeah, no, that's not going to talk about that. The guy was a murderer, but somehow managed to go out to Vegas and kind of baptize himself in respectability. In terms of women, hey, there's been powerful women, but just never, in the mafia. I think Virginia Hill for a long time, had some respectability to it. She got it by sleeping around, but, she managed to stay around for a while.
Oh, speaking of sleeping around, will you tell us about the octopus again?
Sure. Well, no, just
I know that's where we got off track because I brought up
there it was.
Abby. But I
Well, it's
remember you
just-
were going to tell us about the octopus.
Well, so the octopus, which Danny Casolaro had was exploring before his untimely death, when he talks about when it started, like this group of like covert operatives, it all started out of a botched intelligence operation in Albania. So like I think it was like in 1949, so something post the beginning of the Cold War, and it started from there. And then eventually it was like CIA, military guys, and then there might have even been mob guys in it too at some point. What's his name? Howard Hughes, one of his chief aides, Robert Mayhew, would be named as one of the members of the Octopus at one point. But they were kind of like, in the end, sort of like a mafia of their own too. Like a group that's able to kind of commit crimes and murders wantonly and never really be held accountable for it.
They
And
call them political parties now too.
yeah,
My family, well, my dad's family back home, and through marriage with other families, have created, I guess you would say, a mafia political party. And my cousin just recently was killed in Greece. He was in charge in Skopje of the town that we lived in, that I lived in back when I was born there. But about in 2002, my brother was killed during a hit of a mafia confrontation. There was a hit on this man, and excuse me. Whew. And my cousin was a bodyguard for one of these guys, and his name was Redvan. And this was all tied to the war in Kosovo. And there was like a lot of blood money because of organ donations, or not organ donations, organ harvesting and drug money and whatnot. So this guy was in hiding, and my cousin was supposed to be his bodyguard. So my brother knew what was going to happen that day, but he decided that he wanted to go, but none of us was aware about what was going to happen. So my cousin took my brother along with him, sat my brother next to the guy who had a hit on him, I guess to make him comfortable, but not really thinking what was really going to happen. They just knew that he needed to be taken out, but they didn't know how he was going to be taken out. My cousin stepped away and left my brother on the table. They barricaded the roads. Men in masks came by, machine guns, grenades, threw grenades at the cafe that they were sitting at, shot up everybody at the cafe. About 17 people died that day, including my brother. And it started a blood feud. So a year later, for revenge for my brother, my cousin got his first kill because of the guilt of taking my brother where he wasn't supposed to take him because he was only 16 years old, So, yeah, I mean,
Sorry.
they do it.
Jesus.
They do it for some I see as like puppets for the government to do their dirty work. Some I see is just for survival, and some I see they just do it for fun and they have no care in the world. But this shit's real.
Real life.
Shit's super real. Yeah,
Sorry, Lula.
Yeah, that sucks.
it happens.
The words for that.
Like expect the unexpected. You
Yeah.
just learn. You learn from these
Sucks.
situations, and what can
Yeah.
you do?
In terms of, so speaking of, I mentioned, the octopus, but also talk about law, what government law enforcement. Has anyone ever heard of the company?
The company.
No.
Yeah.
I have
There's a
heard.
group. You've heard of them, Gordy?
I've heard of them.
Yeah.
Go-
Out of Kentucky. So when you mention,
I was gonna say
Colonel
Southern,
Sanders.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. The company they were a group of blue bloods out of Kentucky. There's a guy named, that Cocaine Bear?
Oh, right.
That movie they
Uh-huh.
made, Cocaine Bear. Andrew Carter Thornton II. He was I think he was DEA, and at one point, or at least was a drug cop. And a guy named Bradley Bryant were the head of this group, and it was called the Company. And they were like half like paramilitary. They were connected to the Chagra brothers, who were, I believe, they were Lebanese. Jimmy Chagra would eventually figure into the murder of a federal judge that a certain actor's father would be arrested for. That would be Woody Harrelson's dad, Charles, would be involved in that. by the time of Drew Thornton's death in a parachuting, the parachute that didn't work or something, with drugs tied to his back, the company they had their fingers all the way up to like the governor of Kentucky, John Brown, involvement with, they had connections all over the place. And in the end, I think they only got Thornton, they find dead, some poor schmuck's yard or whatnot. The cocaine, a bear winds up ingesting that in a forest. I think it was in Carolina is where some of the cocaine wound up. And everybody else kind of just, they got a couple guys here and there, but it was like one group that was really
bears,
connected.
cocaine sharks.
Yeah, Albania is actually now they call it the Columbia of Europe now. Albania is the #1 producer of cocaine in Europe. Everybody's becoming a drug addict and drug dealers.
Well, as much as they try to, the mafia, the whole thing with like The Godfather, they have that scene near the end when they're talking about, we're going to control the trade. And even though they kind of mention it in kind of like a racist aspect to it, you don't want it near schools and, but, let it go to the poorer areas. They're animals anyway, that sort of mentality. The whole rule was just don't get caught. You could deal these guys were taking money. That's how RICO works. If Paul Castellano took money from Angelo Ruggiero, who's dealing drugs, that could be connected to a RICO charge. I think that's what Castellano feared, even though
what's RICO?
What is RICO?
The Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations Act. And it was developed by Professor Robert Blakey from Notre Dame. He actually was in the Kennedy Justice Department. Bobby Kennedy worked under him. Named it, after was it Edward G. Robinson's character? I think in the movie Little Caesar. I think his character's name was Rico. And Blakey. Mother of Mercy. Is this the end of Rico? But
looks like we're heading up the gloves, boys.
Blakey, two interesting things about him was he would serve on the House Select Committee on Assassinations and would take the CIA's word on everything. And he was giving a presentation December 16th, 1985 to law enforcement when all the beepers in the room went off to say that Paul Castellano had just been killed at Sparks Steakhouse. Blakey
I missed the time of beepers.
Where was that? Where was that steakhouse?
Manhattan. Sparks Steakhouse.
Manhattan. Okay. Yep. I just think it's funny that because I was reading up on Joe Bonanno and the whole, because I remember as a kid like hearing his interviews late at night on AM radio, like in the 90s. Those guys were still alive. Joe just died in 2002, I think.
Yeah.
And he's buried in Holy Hope Cemetery on Oracle Road in Tucson. And anyway, he talks about how he came up with Joe Kennedy because they were both rum runners. And how, isn't it funny how Joe, like his kids, like go hard against the mafia and bring up RICO.
Yeah.
I think the RICO is the thing that everybody needs to learn, because if there is a crime, when people talk about anything with Hollywood, with Weinstein, or when they go into Epstein or Ghislaine and that kind of stuff, RICO is how they can tie all these. So we always see like a lot of these mafia guys, they always go down for taxes. We know everything else they do. We see these movies and these murders and this drug running and smuggling and guns and all the things, but they go down for taxes. And what do we just see Hunter Biden get in trouble for? Taxes. And so I think this same kind of taxes. I know. I think this kind of RICO stuff is, taxes are a double cross. They even have it in the symbolism of the word tax. They have a cross and an X. It's like letting you know, don't do this. But yeah, I just think that it's an interesting, because we were talking about like a Biden crime family, and if one of them gets in trouble with like 9 counts of tax fraud, it just seems like taxes. But this is how they get a lot of these crime families, right?
Yeah, I mean,
with the RICO Act,
They didn't use it for a good portion of it, the first decade. You know, after it was rolled out, they didn't really use it. It didn't really become a thing until, even though they kind of had a partnership to a degree, until Reagan. You know, the Reagan Justice Department. Even though, like I said, there was definitely. I mean, Reagan was mob connected through MCA, his former talent agency. But yeah, in the 80s is when they started going after. They went after first the Midwest bosses for the casino skimming. That's how they went after for RICO charges, and that's how they got a couple of the bosses in Chicago. They got the Kansas City bosses, Cleveland, and then the Man of Honor book, Bonanno's book, giving up the commission when Giuliani announced the indictments of the bosses, Castellano, what's his name, Carmine Persico, Fat Tony Salerno, Tony Dux Corallo. It was on RICO charges. And there is only, as far as I know now, one guy left from who's still alive, and that's Bruno Delicato, who is featured in Donnie Brasco. He's the one that Donnie will get made if he helps kill.
That's what another question that I had. What does get made mean, and why would it be so important?
Being made is like the honor. Like, so you are in mob parlance, like you're an associate at first. Now, someone could vouch for you to kind of have you that you're under their control, and that, you know, no one, like Lefty says to Donnie, you know, no one can touch you. You're with me now. Donnie Brasco, while he was under with the Bananas, he was initially with the Columbos. He goes over to the Bananas. You know, he's trying to build a case, like builds a lengthy case against, you know, while infiltrating a mafia family. And he winds up with Lefty Ruggiero. And at that point, he's an associate. Now, the mafia families at one point had thousands of associates. Now, you can do other things maybe a made guy can't, because there are rules when you're a made man. But a made man is the top honor because you are, at that point, a soldier in a mafia family. And you can do things as a made man that you couldn't do, you know, as someone who was not a made man. But at the same time, there are rules for being a made man. You can't sleep with another made man's wife, you know, without consequence. You could be killed for that. Yeah. You're not supposed to deal drugs. But that's, like I said, it's like one of the, you know, wink and a nod, not really, just don't get caught.
For Joe Pesci's character, he was the only one that was full-blooded Irish or Italian in Goodfellas.
Oh, in Goodfellas? Yeah.
Yeah.
But in his case, so, you know, like when they say it was revenge for Billy Bats, among other things, Tommy, in the movie, it was Tommy DeVito, but the character's name, but in real life, his name was Tommy DeSimone. Tommy DeSimone was a psychotic piece of shit. He tried to rape Karen Hill.
Wow.
He was okay with randomly just finding. He was almost like the Iceman. He was almost like Richard Kuklinski, except he actually did some of the stuff that he's been charged with. Henry Hill said he randomly just picked out a guy and shot him on the street. Tommy might have been able to have been ID'd in regards to Lufthansa, because he disappeared in January 1979. And the story was Henry Hill's last book, like his last sort of like memoir, said it had to do with his attempted rape of Karen Hill. Karen Hill was having an affair with Paul Vario, and Paul Vario gave the okay for it. Others have said John Gotti was involved because Billy Bats.
They go a little to that into Goodfellas, that Henry didn't love that Karen was getting money all the time from Paulie and having secret meetings with Paulie.
Yeah. They said that the guy Billy Bats, who was a made man when they killed him, was friends with John Gotti. And, you know, they even mentioned, they were like, you know, Bats was a member of the Gambinos, you know, and how it was like they were being asked, Paulie was being asked where this guy was. Tommy DeSimone had killed him, and he'd also killed another guy named Foxy Giroth, there was another connection with an attempted sexual assault of another woman. So I said, this is a guy who just had to go, and they might have, in the end, kind of done it under the guise of, hey, he's being made. because I had read, I mean, they show it in Goodfellas that he killed Stacks. I think he did in real life. And, you know, it was a hard decision, but he did it because that's just the guy he was. And they might have told him, yeah, you're going to be made. And it's interesting enough, one of the guys who supposedly pulled the trigger on Tommy, this guy, Bruno, I think his name was Bruno Facciola, would eventually go pretty roughly when the Lucchese family had a mob war led by their boss and underboss, Vic Amuso and Anthony Gaspipe Casso, and they'd start eliminating anybody they didn't trust. I think they killed like about 24 guys.
The names that you know, I'm just like blown away.
Well, here, so Gaspipe.
I know. I'm like, I want a spider web of all their names and how they attach and who was the mob boss. Like, I need it all laid out, and then I need to zoom into spots.
Gaspipe, I think, committed the sin of saying he knew stuff about Sammy Gravano that the FBI didn't want to know. And Gaspipe had a deal. He was gonna be the highest defector ever, and he had a deal. And the next thing you know, the FBI's like, "Nope, you breached it," and they sent him to Colorado. He wound up in the Supermax, and he died during COVID.
Huh?
You know, died in 2020.
Did he get the jab?
Maybe.
They probably took out so many people on the quiet with this that they were like, no loose lips will sink this ship. So they probably, so many people died in prison, but probably were just like, and go to sleep. And
yeah, you could go that way, or they could do the way, you know, Whitey Bulger got done. Violently.
Well, yeah.
How do you get done violently?
He got beaten to death by a guy who was actually Boston mob connected. I didn't even know that until a book I just read within the past year. I was like, oh, I thought it was just some random, you know, because Whitey was a rat, even though he said he wasn't. And I said, there's still stuff we don't know.
And there's
about
a couple movies on Whitey Bulger, right?
The Departed is the main one, and it's based on the fact that he had someone in Massachusetts State Police as, you know, to feed him information. But he also had, like in real life, I mean, this guy John Connolly, and I always kind of find that funny that there's like two other guys I know, John Connolly. One was the one who was behind Kennedy in the assassination who got shot. And there's a couple writers named John Connolly. But John Connolly, the FBI agent, was the one who was like, you know, he was in awe of Whitey Bulger and Whitey's brother, Billy. And the deal that was made with Whitey was made in the late 70s that, oh, he'd become what they call a top echelon informant, him and a guy named Steve Fleming, who they took over the Winter Hill gang in Boston, and ran it with impunity for about 15 years until everything started falling apart. And Bulger went on the run. Fleming stayed. Fleming got busted, and it went from there. But yeah, the amount of movies they could do. I mean, they did Black Mass with those horrible contacts on Johnny Depp. You know, the making him have this. I mean, he looks psychotic in that movie. And there's a great documentary that was done about the Bulger case, and, you know, the victim's families trying to get some sort of, you know, restitution and answers. I said the government's still hiding stuff on that case because that entire Boston office, I think, was crooked. You know, it goes back to when Hoover was still alive. Some of the deals they made, they protected the guy.
Skadies.
Yeah. I mean, when was the last? I mean, it's probably one of the last times Alec Baldwin was good in a movie was that movie.
Yeah, I actually think that's Mark Wahlberg's best movie.
Yeah.
It's like easily his best role. He is so great in that. Like,
what's the matter? You don't like Shakespeare?
What'd you do last night? Your mother. She was doing my father.
The Boondock Saints were they like?
That's
was that
one.
like? Yeah, that was like a mafia. You would say mafia, Irish mafia.
Yeah, I mean, it's big. So, I mean, I've only seen the first one. They made a sequel that wasn't as good received,
movie.
And they've been trying to do another one, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. The guy who wrote that, Troy Duffy, had a huge thing back when the movie was being made with Harvey Weinstein. They did a whole documentary about that. He thought Weinstein was trying to have him killed, which, to be honest,
I believe
possibility.
Yeah.
But the two guys in the Boondock Saints, the whole thing is they're vigilantes, and, you know, in the beginning of the movie, there's the whole thing with the priest telling the story about Kitty Genovese, the woman in Queens who got killed in the 60s, who might have been related to Vito in a distant relation, who was killed, and that a bunch of people heard it and didn't do anything. And that's what kind of, the two brothers, Connor and Murph, eventually become, with their friend Rocco, who's a knockaround guy with the mob, wind up taking on the mob. And
somebody in chat brought up, Whitey being like an MK Ultra victim potentially.
I think when he was in Atlanta, something like that.
Do you think the mob and there's a lot more of these maybe even mob bosses or high ranking guys that we know, like Whitey Bulgers potentially, that this almost like serial killers, where we get this we have to think of mafia and mob in this really sinister way, but maybe.
Are you saying like a program to kill, like a Dave McGowan sort of thing?
Yeah, it makes me wonder.
But so I was who I was talking to? I was talking to Tina Bina on
Tina Bear.
Yeah, Tina Bear on in Telegram, and I was telling her about the book A Terrible Mistake about Frank Olson and the CIA with the MK Ultra experiments, and the fact that there was a guy named George Hunter White who was Office of Strategic Services. He knew mob guys. He also ran the two safe houses in New York and San Francisco, where they were running Operation Midnight Climax, where they were prostitutes were meeting some were mob guys, some were like small time mob guys or intelligence people who might have been like a security risk, and they were dosing them with that LSD. I think they eventually worked their way to, because at one point I think it was PCP, and they had tried other things, but it wouldn't surprise me, at a point. I mean, they've tried to downplay Bulger with the LSD, but they said that might have led into the reason why he used to have like a thing with the dark. He didn't like the dark. He didn't like going to sleep. He had his nightmares. Might have turned him into the psychotic he was, because he didn't kill, from anything I've read, until after he got back, after he did time, because he did time for bank robbery, and he had done time in Alcatraz. He had done time in Atlanta, and he missed the major mob war that broke out amongst the Irish and some Italians. But it was really not even it wasn't the Boston mob, which was an outgrowth of Providence. Boston mob wasn't headquartered. I mean, it was headquartered in Providence by a guy named Raymond Patriarca. Boston had the Angiulo brothers, who oversaw Patriarcha's empire in Boston. But you had Charlestown and you had Somerville. You had these areas in Massachusetts that were suburbs of Boston. And in the early 1960s, you had the McLean-McLaughlin War that started over one guy making a pass at another guy's girlfriend, and a war that broke out and left 60 people dead over like 5
for a
years.
Girlfriend.
Yep.
Damn. All
Yep.
right.
And
Shit.
one of the guys, and I'll name drop and give another reference to that, because one of the guys who was in that gang who eventually escaped to Hollywood was a guy named Alex Rocco, who played Mo Green in The Godfather. He was actually arrested for murder at one point during that. And then I guess they didn't have enough to hold him. He left, went to Hollywood, and he would come back when they made a movie called The Friends of Eddie Coyle that involved elements of like the low level mob guys and stuff like that, which a lot of those movies did have a lot of those connected guys on the set. Even The Departed did too. The Departed had a guy named John Shea. His name, I think it was John Shea. His nickname was Red. He was connected to Whitey Bulger, and he might have been a consultant on the set of the movie. But they mob guys in movies, I think, has always been.
What's that story?
One from another.
Somebody in the audience wants to know if West Side Story was based on
the Jets and the Sharks. That I couldn't tell you.
It's
Probably.
probably based on a true story.
Come away from your first cigarette to the last Italian.
So you happen to know
Very,
a lot about
very-
Italian mafias. Now, do you know anything about the Japanese scary ass mafia?
The Yakuza.
Yeah.
Not enough. I mean, I think the first time I ever read anything.
You guys are ready to
about
see my
them.
tattoo. No,
Oh, I was about to say,
would that be so dope? If, I was
I
all
think
Yakuza
the first
tatted.
time I heard of Yakuza might have been, what was it, Rising Sun, the movie Rising Sun.
Mm-hmm.
with Wesley Snipes and Sean Connery, and that one of the guys was Yakuza. But Casino, which I just reread
Mm.
for like the third time.
I
The
heard about them.
movie and the book, but I think it was only the hardcover, makes mention of a guy who was like a whale, like a high gambler at one of the casinos. His name was like Ichikawa or something, and at some point he lost millions of the Yakuza's money, and they had him
Yeah.
whacked.
I found out about the Yakuza through doing conspiracy shit and finding like, about the like skin harvesting and like, child pedophilia shit. And all of a sudden I see like skin peelings of Yakuza whole body, like pinned on like frames and shit. And like people actually do this so their skin can be like skinned off of them after they pass. This is like a whole tradition that they did back in the day. And I guess this goes back like way back, like this whole practice of tattooing your entire body. I don't know much of it, but I believe it's tied to like ancient practice.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
think
sure.
it is a really ancient practice, and there's something about the suits they wear covering the tattoos like completely, because it seems like some kind of honor, like they get more tattoos the more weird stuff maybe they do for the mob, and then
Maybe.
their skin hung is like almost like their uniform, like how high ranking they were and how respected they were in the group.
But yeah, maybe because there's again, like there's always like a signal, so, like a way to kind of show that you're one of them or whatnot. Like in the mob, like would I say, hey, this is Cheney? No, this is Cheney, a friend of ours. A friend of ours says you're someone in the mafia. A friend of mine just means
A good fella.
you're connected. Yeah, a good fella.
Maybe you have to go to
a
specialist tattoo who does those specific tattoos in order to even be considered a Yakuza. Or I don't think you could go to any tattoo artist and get that done.
I think you'd have to be connected.
Yeah, I think it's probably even ritualistic too, honestly.
I thought I might have even saw Yakuza when I read about, what was it, that cult in Japan, the one that nerve gassed, like the subway, the Om Shariko, something like that, the one in the 90s.
Yeah,
I thought they might have been Yakuza connected.
They use that tapping, tattooing. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah,
that needling tapping thing.
Needlepoint tattooing.
A lot of fighters have different kind of that. I think even Angelina Jolie has a certain kind of on her left shoulder. We were talking about Hollywood a little, and I know like JFK's death, everybody is like the mafia is involved in it, but for his entire career, the mafia is involved in it. Doesn't like Frank Sinatra get him voted in with the help of the mafia?
So always been a subject of controversy. So the two closest states in that 60 election were Illinois, but specifically Chicago and Texas. And so Texas could have been Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson had his own, you could almost call it a mafia, with his connections with defense contractors and oil guys. I can't remember. It might have actually been Double Cross, which was written by Giancana's brother and nephew. That was one of the first ones that said that a deal was made, that Joe, who, the old man who was a bootlegger that's been reputed for a long time, and that supposedly Frank Costello saved him from being killed at one point, that he approached Giancana. And some would say later on that Judith Campbell, who was like, a mob mole, might have been a go-between. But that's been like, some just said it's to kind of just dig dirt on the Kennedys after the fact. There's The Dark Side of Camelot by Seymour Hersh that came out, and he's like, oh, I have these documents, and it turned out to be bogus. Someone sold them to him. And I still think, like, nowadays, after everything I've read about Seymour Hersh, I think someone did it to screw him over, kind of hurt his integrity. I don't really know. Like, there's so much out there where it's like stuff contradicting each other. What comes from J. Edgar Hoover? Hoover, who hated the Kennedys with like a passion, and Hoover was mob connected, and Hoover might have been blackmailed by the mob.
Totally blackmailed.
Not the CIA. His relationship with Clyde Tolson as associate director. Later on, a congressman accused him of living as man and wife, and that congressman didn't last that much longer in office for that.
Well,
Well, I was wondering,
But-
like MK Ultra, like if Whitey Bulger's MK Ultra, and then there's been all of the talk about like Marilyn Monroe and all the conspiracy behind her. So then, if you have these links that there was like mafia sex kittens that were used like honey traps, almost like they took Midnight Climax and then just turned it up with this like Heidi Fleicy Hollywood thing, but they were doing it with these original actresses to just like lure in different politicians. And so it's like, I don't know. I was just wondering if that's like, were they more connected to the mob, or is it all CIA connections back then?
And you wonder, is it something that goes earlier than, CIA? Because I think of some of the stuff that's been rumored about Hollywood, like back, like that I came across in fictional wise, but LA Confidential, the book LA Confidential, talking about this, this kind of like prostitutes, that like Kim Basinger plays, Fleur de Lis, whatever you desire, and it's women who look like movie stars, but some who look young. And the fact that some said, yeah, there was some weird stuff with like prostitutes or kids. I think might have even been kids, like back in like back when the studio boss was like the most powerful person.
Like Shirley Temple.
Yeah. Well, in the movie, they show someone who looks like Shirley Temple, like entertaining someone.
Yeah, it's so
and
creepy.
It's like, it's creepy. Yeah. And, I said, I don't know if James Ellroy did his own research or someone provided him with that, but there's stuff in there that's like just so
dark.
Like just, yeah. Oh shit. Yeah. Well, he's dark to begin with, but in terms of his stuff, but, yeah, no. Sometimes you just wonder, like, well, did they just come up with this, or did they just do the research? And the research is scary. But in terms of Marilyn Monroe, it's been attributed. Again, in that book Double Cross, they say, that they gave her like a deadly enema, basically, something like that. That she had been used up, and Sam Giancana, once again, through his brother and his nephew, say that they killed her after a weekend at the Cal Neva Lodge, which is what Sinatra had an interest in because it was right on the border. It was a hotel casino on the border of Nevada and California, and that they gave her something.
And Peter Lawford, like he was one of the original Rat Pack members. It's like Sammy and Dean, Peter. Yeah. They say that before the cops get there, after Marilyn dies, Peter shows up to her house and takes her diary only and leaves. I always thought that was interesting because then you have that like Rat Pack pool. So whatever she wrote in there, and everybody always attaches JFK, but I think there's more likely that JFK was probably a homosexual and RFK was more likely the one that Marilyn was hooking up with.
Well, speaking of diary and speaking of Kennedy's, you have 2 years later, you have Mary Meyer, who is allegedly JFK's mistress, and she gets killed in DC, and people start going to look for her diary, and her brother-in-law was Ben Bradley of the Washington Post and Watergate fame, and the person who they find, her sister and Ben Bradley find, is James Angleton, the CIA counterintelligence director.
Huh.
And they never found the diary, and because they said the book Mary's Mosaic said that she introduced JFK to LSD. And that's how JFK, like it changed him from like a cold warrior to like, that it had an effect on him, that, to find peace in our time and things like that. I said, it's a stretch. It was a good book, but I said, again, there's stuff in there where it's just like, okay, after a while, is almost every one of these books that comes out now just pieces of speculation and, he said, she said, and misdirection. And
you have to wait till the right person dies to make up the story.
Yeah,
right.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Do you think that part of the whole game is to embellish just a little bit? Because there's rumors around, because Bill was a big deal around here, and like you just hear stories, and people talking about how he, or maybe it was Junior, would embellish what the family did and stuff like that. And and you find that with a lot of like braggadocio Italians, is part of the kind of thing. But do you think that's kind of part of the game, is like embellishing for storytelling effect to kind of like hide, and some of that might be like embellishing a lot just to hide the real shit that they did do that doesn't seem so bad, but hey, look, they're diddling kids over here.
No.
But we just
I
knocked
think
off
that
a bunch of dudes for a girl.
I think that, I think there's always a level of bragging. I mean, so I mentioned, with Gravano's book, but there's, the guy who wrote it, Peter Moss, had done the Bellacci papers, and Joe Bellacci was the first mobster to turn, and, he testifies in front of a Senate committee 2 months before Kennedy gets killed, and he provides, so much about the mafia. And in his book, the Bellacci papers, he talks about a guy who's a killer named Buster. That was like a good friend and killed this guy, and this guy, and then Buster winds up dead.
Yeah.
Joe Bellacci's like, Peter Moss later on is like, I couldn't find anybody who resembled this Buster. So part of Moss started thinking Bellacci used Buster as a way to kind of alleviate his own guilt. Bellacci died in jail anyway because the only reason why he turned is because he winds up serving time with Vito Genovese, and Vito Genovese believed that Bellacci was a rat. He goes up to Bellacci, gives him a kiss on the lips, and he said, that's the kiss of death. And one day Bellacci's walking through the yard in Atlanta, and he sees a guy who he thinks it's this guy Joe Di Palermo, and that who's a hitman, and he takes a lead pipe that he finds and beats the guy to death. Turns out it's just some poor schmuck who looked like him.
Oh, shit.
And at that point, Bellacci's facing possible death sentence, and that's when he starts talking. And it kind of went from there. But yeah, you start wondering, did he use? And you think, oh, this is just some dumb mob guy. Bellacci might have used this Buster to kind of just lay off hits on someone else. And then you get a guy like Sammy Gravano, who they say, 19 murders. That's who he did. Gravano had his brother-in-law killed. That was one of the hits he did. You get Gas Pipe Casso saying that Gravano dealt drugs, which he never confessed to. So that would be something that could cause a problem with Gravano's deal. And it could also lead to an issue with every trial he testified in. And then you had the Iceman, Richard Kuklinski, accusing Gravano of being involved in the murder of a cop in 1980. And within about...
I wonder if when he left the
years
courtroom, he was like this. That's what I always think of. The gayest scene in Top Gun is when the Iceman
God.
does that to Tom.
Really? It's not the volleyball scene?
No, it's when he
Oh,
chomps his teeth at him in the locker room.
yeah, pretty gay.
You know what's interesting?
Yeah.
You never really hear of these mobsters being pedophiles. Or am I wrong?
Yeah, no.
Well, no. For the most part, you don't.
No.
However, Bulger has been accused of either being pretty close to being a pedo. Steve Flemmi was. Steve Flemmi was involved with two of his girlfriend's daughters, and he had them both killed.
Oh, wow.
Deborah Davis and Deborah Hussey strangled them both, or had Whitey do it. And Deborah Hussey, he had been involved with since she was a young teenager.
Huh.
Where that word comes from?
No. What, Hussey?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Where does it come from, Thomas?
I don't know. I was just curious. I never.
Oh.
It would be a crazy coincidence.
It sounded like you knew.
That just means she has a huge pussy.
Hussy.
But yeah, in the end, I'm sure it would have been a death sentence for most if that had been found out. To be honest, being gay could be a death sentence. That happened in the New Jersey wing. That story with Vito in The Sopranos, that happened. That happened in the Cavalcanti family in New Jersey. A guy named, I want to say his name was John Amato. I think that was his name, John Amato. And they found out he had a double life. He was married, but he was gay. And he was killed. They lured him and they killed him. Vito from The Sopranos was based on a guy named Vito Arena, who was part of the DeMeo crew in the Gambinos. The DeMeo crew scared even John Gotti. because the DeMeo crew has alleged to have killed about 250 people. And they were out of Canarsie, and they were out of Brooklyn, led by a guy named Roy DeMeo, who at one point was a butcher. They were involved in porn. They were involved in an auto theft ring, and that's where a lot of the murders came out
The
of.
Butcher is a badass mafia name. It's better than the Iceman. The Butcher, people know. Like,
and the Iceman was a media name that they gave Kuklinski because of the whole thing with they found the body that had been preserved in ice that threw off the time of death.
Teflon Don, that's a good media name too. And they're using it again right now. Because it was,
or the Dapper Don, that was the other
Dapper
one.
Don's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Gotti, because it was the well-dressed nature of John Gotti.
Is the mafia more like progressive now? Are they more woke? Would they accept like, non-binary members, or is it still pretty like machismo?
I think it's still pretty much machismo, but nowadays it's like, it's quiet, even though something just came up with like a bust. And I said to my wife and a couple other people, I'm like, get ready. They'll say this signals the death of the mafia. I'm like, every freaking bust since I was a kid is supposed to signal the death knell of the mafia. I said, well, if it's the death knell of the mafia, how in the hell are they still getting arrested, years later? I said, how are you getting bosses that manage to kind of just, operate under the surface? I said, even the families that are considered dormant, they're still around. The Chicago outfit is one of the, and that would be one that would almost be considered progressive, because they had Greeks, they had Welshmen, they had Jewish guys, blacks, Japanese guy. They had a Japanese guy who eventually turned informer in the Chicago outfit. I mean, they had, they pretty much accepted anybody who was greedy and was willing to kill. One of their more prolific guys in the Chicago outfit was a guy named Harry Alleman, who was, was a very prolific hitman for them. And I believe he wasn't Italian, he was Spanish. And he challenged his trial when he got caught for a shotgun murder, would eventually challenge the double jeopardy statute, because his first trial, the Chicago outfit reached out to a guy who was known to fix cases, a guy named Bob Cooley, to get to the judge. Cooley paid the judge a bribe of $10,000 to a guy who'd never taken a bribe before. And they made it a judge-directed verdict. And he gave the verdict to the outfit, and Alleman skated for another 15 years or so. And then when Cooley turned, whoever tried, I don't know if it was Illinois authorities or if it was U.S. attorney, charged Alleman for the same murder. They're like, it's double jeopardy. They're like, well, since the bribe was paid, there was never a trial. So they charged him for the same murder again. That's how they beat double jeopardy. They were saying once the bribe came, it was no longer a trial.
Why do you think they continue? Why do you think the families keep going? Why do you think
I think once.
I mean, this is an ancient thing we're talking about, the crime tradition being in families.
I think in some cases, because it's tradition, I don't know if you're ever going to see that sort of Michael Corleone, we're going to be legitimate sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are, there's certain, not everybody wants to continue, like when John Gotti was bragging about how Junior was made, there was a couple people who said along the lines of, oh, that's a shame, like why? But I think, it's all they've ever known.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for,
it's,
I'm like, how much do I want to say? I worked for like offshoot of the Gotti family, and it was a legitimate place in Los Angeles that I worked at. But I would say that there maybe, it's been enough time. There's maybe been not legitimate things that I saw go on there, and then some of it was so perfectly for the movies. Like one of the guys owned a vending company that was on all the lots in Hollywood. So you'd get a random job to go clean out the vending machines. And then one of the guys worked backstage at an amphitheater. He was like the head of the whole backstage area. So sometimes there was like, I was just like looked like me, and I was a little goody goody with long blonde hair. So I knew it was cash in an envelope. I could feel it. I wasn't a dildo. Like I could tell but if I just handed it to the other dude, then I always got to go backstage. So it was just like an easy knock. And then I was just like, hey, is this guy there? And then I just handed it. And probably because I never touched it or gave a shit, like I just treated it like it wasn't real money. Like, what am I going to run off with this? And so I got a whole bunch of crazy experiences because of that connection in life. But yeah, they're still doing stuff. And I kind of think it's like the dirty members who are crime ridden, they have kids that they make the kids legitimate. And then those kids have dirty kids that are crime. It's like every other.
Sometimes it
So
skips,
the
but
politician lawyers are half of it. And then the other half is like holding the guns and killing.
Yeah, like my uncle, he's a loan shark where people come to him and ask him for money, but then he charges them an interest. And like, if they don't give him the money, you know, like, I'll give you a certain day that, you know, you give me the money. And it's usually for either gambling or whatever. But he's a part of that. And his son is now, you know, in the line now.
Yeah.
The philosophy of the mob, do you hate? I mean, there's a lot of it that probably a lot of anyone that was going to have a business or a military, or it's probably a lot of the same setup that we're doing, where there's like one head and then it goes down into two and then it goes down into four and then it goes, you know, like the same triangle pyramid of power.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the family, like these kind of things, it would have to be tens of hundreds of years of something that you would trust, because look how corrupt the world is. Like everything we talk about with conspiracy all the time. So if you really felt like, dang, you can't even build a building in New York without this, it's going to take my family. I'm not going to be able to do it this lifetime, but my sons will be able to do it. And so you kind of have to set yourself up at this long game that you're like, I can only trust my sons in business. I can only trust our cousins. So then it's like, we know we're not going to F each other over. But this is kind of the whole idea that the Rothschilds did, right? Is one guy has 6 sons and it's like, hey, you're going to all start banks on different continents. And then we will trade the money with each other.
Well, they do it more for legacy. It's like leaving a legacy behind and like an estate behind, and you know, for their future generations. And that's what it's coming to now. If you don't see, like everywhere, the fucking crime rates are like crazy. People can't afford, so they're turning to crime, and they're going to start their own like little clans. It's not going to be like Mafia, but I mean, eventually, who knows what it'll turn into if we continue on this route. Oh my God.
Would you be in a mafia or a gang? Like not right now, but in the right scenario in life.
If all hell were to break loose in the United States, yes, and I will join the rednecks of the South.
That's the gang. You're already deciding what gang you're joining.
I'll even tattoo redneck on my neck, bro, just to prove it. Like,
are we talking the Dixie Mafia? Because that was a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. We got guns, baby. I'm there.
Your mafia history before you join any group.
American loving patriots, absolutely.
What's the difference between the Freemasons and the mafia?
That's a good question. I would actually say that the mafia's blood oaths are much more serious than the Freemasons' blood oaths. At least when we're talking like 1950s today.
I mean, you did have in Italy, though, you did have the intersection with the mafia and the Freemasons with the Propaganda Due, P2.
Yeah, P2.
You know, that was, I mean, when that got exposed, that was a huge thing, and that even figures a little bit into the Godfather 3 story again, because Licio Gelli, who is the head of P2, who I think lived to be about 100 years old, would get charged in the Roberto Calvi murder. The guy who was called God's banker would be hung under Blackfriars Bridge, and a very impossible angle to hang yourself by. And yeah, there's definitely intersection between that. And once again, that's Gladio too. You know, another sort of cross connection. And probably you can find CIA there too, because CIA and Gladio and NATO and all that stuff is all interconnected in one way or another.
And part of sorry, go ahead.
No. Go
Well, I've read the part of.
Don't worry about it, right?
Part of the overlap, and this is debatable, between Freemasons and the Mafia, and even more specifically, I guess, at the Catholic Church and the Mafia, was just that joining forces against communists was a higher priority than any other minor issue that they saw, and they set everything aside to fight communism, even including like the Vatican rat lines, right?
Yep.
Interesting that you say that, because I was going to ask, is it the CCP like its own little mafia? Isn't it like big money, like can't fuck with them, don't mess with the CCP, like crazy killer, like the Mossad? Aren't they like the mafia? No?
I mean, with Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
I would say so. You know, I mean,
Or weren't
in
they?
the end, anything that's kind of, I mean, I don't know if I mean, to be honest, in China, when China was being fought up for control, the one who was closer to being a mafioso was Chiang Kai-shek. He was a drug lord. I mean, and but he was our drug lord. That's the thing. We always seem to pick the shittiest people to kind of back, or at least the degenerates. But yeah, we had Chiang Kai-shek, who was opium and everything like that. Some of the stuff that would eventually kind of figure into the Vietnam War, and the airliners, the Air America, all that crap out of there. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure. First of all, China's so closed off. I mean, what are we really learning out of a country that's very kind of like secretive on its own? Yeah. I mean, they're the last living communist. I mean, I don't even know if you can call Cuba communist anymore, but China is really the last bastion of communism.
Well, we're kind of leaning towards that.
Yeah.
Shit.
Are they doing it right? Is China? How everyone always says that no one's ever done communist the right way. Is China doing it the right way, or do you think if that fails, it'll just be another they
We're talking human misery? They're doing a great job.
Yeah, I couldn't live like that. I saw this lady, I guess she rated low on the score or whatever, how they score it. I don't know. She couldn't even buy food, bro, on her digital currency, whatever they use over there. She couldn't even buy food. She couldn't even go on the subway to get a ticket to buy, travel. That's how
low ESG.
I don't know what the
ESG
system
score?
was. Yeah, she was on TikTok.
Well, that's what they're worried about bringing here.
Yeah.
It's like the ESG, like something like that.
Yeah. We're in the works of bringing it here, and I'm afraid that it will be here, but we got to fight against it. Just saying that out loud, all right, y'all.
We meet at the docks after 8:00 on Wednesday.
And aside, the piece of crap that just left this planet, Kissinger. I mean, he went to China within the past year for some sort of secret meeting with Xi, and who knows what the hell they were talking about. I mean, and there were people who were against Nixon and Nixon and Kissinger opening up China in the 70s.
Yeah.
So we still don't know the ramifications of that.
I believe so much that whatever Nixon deleted off those tapes had something to do with China and his life.
The 18 minutes?
Yeah, I think it was so dark. Whatever was maybe it was human trafficking channels, but it was directly linked to China and the DNC. And his life was so on the line, he chose the shame, and he was the one who deleted it.
Nixon was mob connected.
He seems.
What does that mean? Bush was mob connected? Because I thought Prescott Bush is the one that put Nixon into his path.
Yeah, no. Well, Prescott Bush Bush wanted to be president, but there's a lot of connections. It's interesting, as much as Nixon hated the Eastern establishment, how he was, connected, with Prescott Bush. But yeah, one of the people who helped raise money for Nixon was Mickey Cohen. And Mickey Cohen was he was the de facto successor to Bugsy Siegel in LA, even though they'd call him at one point public nuisance _1, because he was even though he was running his own mob, they almost took him out multiple times. And one of his guys, Johnny Stompanato, was with Lana Turner, the actress, and then eventually would get stabbed to death. And then Mickey Cohen during the inquest is reading Lana Turner's love letters. I mean, wound up being kind of like a tabloid mobster after a while. But I mean, they used to call LA the Mickey Mouse Mafia because it was just so disorganized. But yeah, Nixon, his early campaign was mob financed, and there was connections, I think, throughout his time in Congress. And of course, Nixon figured into the initial plans to get rid of Castro that were mob involved. That's how they got Johnny Roselli and some of those other guys involved, and Robert Mayhew, who would be Howard Hughes's guy.
You know, I always say this. They tell us to abort our bloodlines. Oh, go away. Go, you know, it's time to just leave the nest and whatever. Just enjoy the world. But they slowly destroy the nuclear family, so you can't create your own mob. So you can't create your own army. Dude, I'm telling you, if families stuck together and procreated the way that they should, the governments wouldn't be needed. You would have your own clan. It would be, I guess, not fight the fittest winning. It's about like honor and respect. If you can like know the code of honor and respect, that's what we have in Albania. It's called Besa. It's keeping your word. Our word is everything. Our word is bond. If people know how to keep their word on things, I think society would be great. But no, they want us to break our word, hate, lie, tear the families apart, so you don't have your little mafia clan that the government can't fuck with you. If you had your clan,
it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
The nuclear family is a brainwash. That we don't want that at all. When you look at all these old mafia families, if you look at Mexican families, if you look at Cuban families, if you look at Black American families, they still have, even Catholic families, they still have these huge families. Like, it's not 2.5 kids and a white picket fence and a 2-car garage. They were like a lot of Boston huge houses, or a lot of colonial houses in the South, where it would be like a mother and a father and the sister and her 2 kids, and grandparents lived there and kids lived there. It was like a huge family. And that would even be more so leaning toward mafia, like these whole mob ideas, where the nuclear family, what are you and your 2.5 kids going to do? Like, you can't even take over a McDonald's.
Yeah.
But if you had your huge cousins and cousins and cousins, like
a family estate, you know, and you just buy land and everyone living together, where you grow your own crops. You don't need anything from the fucking government. Find your well, dig your well, get your solar shit. Yo, you're set.
Are we talking about the Kardashians again?
That's how they're living. Look at that.
I mean, John Gotti, I think, was one of like 10 kids. He was like a large family, but I think most of the men in the family wound up gravitating towards crime.
I believe my grandfather was associated with organized crime in Illinois, and I believe he probably worked for my great-grandfather on my grandmother's side, but my great-grandfather fell down an elevator shaft. Which, tell me that is not the most mafia way to die.
Yeah.
Oh, God, yeah.
Oh, my God. I got to tell you about my dad's. I'm sorry. Were you not done?
Oh, no. I was just, my great-grandfather. Like, they said the doors opened and he stepped in. Like,
really?
chatting. Yeah. And he stepped in. There was no elevator there.
That's like cartoon death.
That was like planned.
That is what I think. He was just pushed down an elevator shaft.
Yeah. Through.
Speaking of grandfather, okay, so it's not my grandfather, but my dad's father's brother. Okay, he lives in Brooklyn, and when he came out here, he was pulling some kind of scam. I'm not saying any names, but I think this was what the story was. He was pulling some kind of scams of showing people houses and selling people houses that weren't even his houses. Okay, so he started this scam. This was like back in, I guess, in the 70s or 80s.
What a nightmare! This is nightmare shit. Like, like, I'm in my house, like, yay! I'm so excited. All my furniture is moved in. Everything seems golden, and tink, 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 tink. What? I own this house. Here's my deed. You don't really own this. You're squatting now on somebody's property, and you're going to get arrested if you don't get out
It
of
didn't
here.
even get to that point. He was so good at what he was doing. He was telling people, "Hey, I don't have the keys right now, but I could give this house to you for a really, really good price." And people are just blown away, dude. So eventually, I don't know what the whole story is. Something happened where he had his fingers cut off. Someone in the mob,
Yeah.
like legit, cut his
Whoa.
fingers off, and he had to wear prosthetics. And I think he only has these two fingers, or a couple
Like those.
fingers on his hands.
Grandpa
Yeah.
Fingers.
And this happened in Brooklyn, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah.
No.
That actually
Please.
happened. That actually
King of the
happened.
lobster. That's why they
In
call
the
him the
house.
lobster. He only got two.
That's how
My
we
dad's
handshake.
side is
Doesn't
crazy,
that seem
bro.
intimate? If you had it like this and I had it like this and we stuck it together.
More
Dude, do you know when I had to walk with my
Weird.
uncles? This is how crazy my family is. When I walked with my uncles down just food shopping, right? Anyone that would like look at us or try to bother us, all they had to do was just lift their fucking shirts up and see their guns and just look at their faces and they're like, "Oh shit, I didn't realize they were with them," you know? That's how crazy. I was sitting in my passenger side of the car and my uncle was driving, right? And we're driving and we're at a red light and all of a sudden this guy in the next car besides us starts hitting on me. All my uncle did was like literally put his face like in front of mine so the driver could see me. This guy's face changed like 7 different colors. He became pale, came out of the car, went around to my uncle's side of the car and started apologizing. All my uncle said is like, get back in the fucking car. I don't want to see your face. Just simple like that. I'm like, what the hell? I had no idea what my dad's family was involved in. So when I went over there, I had all these weird shits happen with like, oh fuck, like my family is scary.
You're like, Layla, get in the house. And then I always think the gun beating with the butt of the gun is so brutal compared to the shot.
Yeah,
Like the Joe Pesci gun beatings, like you could almost just mix up like 4 different movies where Joe Pesci is beating somebody with the butt of a gun. And there's nobody that gets that kind of mad on screen like Joe Pesci. He's such an angry little mafioso. And there's something about him, he's a sexy ugly, that I feel like most women in the world, they're like, that little short king, Joe Pesci, he has that BDE.
Well, it's
For
funny.
real.
So by the time, like, what was his? I think his last movie was The Irishman. So by the time he's in The Irishman, he's the boss. He's like nice, calm, and collected. He played this guy Russell Buffalino, who another one who will never know the exact extent of his power. And to be honest, a lot of The Irishman is kind of full of shit, but good movie. But yeah, the Frank Sheeran, the guy who De Niro plays, a lot of his story was, from what I've read, made up. You know, he changed his life story 6 or 7 times, and everybody wants to take credit for the Hoffa hit. You know, I mean, I've read multiple books where people have said, "Oh yeah, no, I was there." It's like, hey, you know, they said Giant Stadium for the longest time is where Jimmy Hoffa was, and then you know they dig up an area of Detroit because the FBI apparently had nothing better to do.
Geraldo. That's how we
yeah.
all got to know Geraldo.
Well, that was Al Capone's vault. Was
Oh wait, different vault.
was Geraldo, but yeah, no, with Hoffa, it's like it's every now and then someone dangles something, be like, oh no, here, you know, let's go dig up some area, and you know we got word of someone who's dying. But yeah, with The Irishman, yeah, Pesci, that was the one movie where Pesci was like calm, cool, and collected. But yeah, every other, I mean, whether it be Goodfellas, Casino, so many different, even Raging Bull, where he looked like he was a mobster, but in the end was just the brother of Jake LaMotta, who was mob connected. You always saw him give a beating to somebody in one of these movies. But yeah, by the time, I think it's kind of like just that respect in the old age that he is playing the boss in that. And he was also played a mob guy in that Matt Damon CIA movie, The Good Shepherd.
Matt Damon loves a good CIA movie.
Well, De Niro
Affleck
directed that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, Robert De Niro comes up a lot. He hates DJT.
You know,
Vax movie that
it's
was
like a little
coming out.
bitch.
He had a movie called Vaxxed that was coming out at like Sundance Film Festival, and apparently it got so much heat he pulled it. and it was anti all vaxes way before the mRNA. But I'm like, he feels like such a shilly guy to me. I just can't even believe he would come out with something good. It felt like something different that they were trying to do to bury it. Like no one else needs to make a movie about this.
Can I make one small change to that?
Yeah.
It was his own. It wasn't Sundance. It was Tribeca. It was the one that was De Niro's own film festival. Because it was Bobby Kennedy was involved in that. With the vax.
Oh, okay.
And then after, I mean, that's De Niro. I think De Niro is just such a piece of shit. Great actor, but I mean,
he is so handsome in Goodfellas.
Yeah,
in Goodfellas, the way he carries himself, his clothes are the best. I like how his hair is.
That first scene, the Irishman's going to take your guinea's money, like just coming in, giving money to everybody left and right. And now you want to hear a creepy story about De Niro real quick, though?
Yes.
He was the original choice. He was the original choice to play Josh Baskin in Big, the Tom Hanks role. Yeah.
That feels like right. I've spent all day since you said Tom Hanks. I have spent all day putting pictures in order from Forrest Gump, like screenshots. Like have over 300 pictures of Forrest Gump, and I'm getting closer to taking this on.
You're gonna do it. You're gonna do a whole episode, huh?
I don't know. You guys might be doing it with me.
No,
Buckle up.
After we watch the movie.
I know. It might be, everybody might be rewatching it. I'll give you guys enough heads up before
Maria asked a good question about did Jenny give him AIDS?
Oh, well, I just think, is it okay that Jenny hooked up with him?
I know. I don't think so. I think it was violation or something.
But that's small potatoes in it. It's like the amount of conspiracies that's in this one movie is too much.
Yeah,
but I don't want to totally derail.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what they were able to do with that movie, in terms of recreating, bringing Tom Hanks into with JFK and LBJ, like some of the, CG, what if it was CGI back then, all that stuff that they were able to do. But there's so much weirdness with that. But the interesting thing, the thing with Big, I'm reading a book I just got for my birthday, The Making of a League of Their Own. And the names that come up there, because a lot of it's about Penny Marshall, who directed that, and who was Penny Marshall married to? Rob Reiner. And if we want to go weird with Rob Reiner, and talking about Tom Hanks and Madonna and Rosie O'Donnell and all these things, I'm like, that movie could just with the personalities involved in that lead to rabbit holes in and of itself.
Weird.
Penny Marshall's not a big enough celebrity for people to get it, but I feel like I could do an okay Penny Marshall impression, because she would be like, "Gordy, your microphone sounds really good today." Like she doesn't move her teeth.
Especially in her old age.
Yeah, and it's so
not Laverne, but
Rob Reiner's such a cucky creep. He's
what a creep.
Is he?
A cucky creep. Rob Reiner is extra creepy.
Really?
But he seems to be best friends with what's the dude from Defending Your Life?
Albert Brooks.
Albert Brooks. I think they're best friends. But all those directors.
You mean Albert Einstein?
Yeah,
his
real name. I know,
his
which is
name, huh?
wild.
Yep.
But then there's so many good scenes. You can't League of Your Own me right now. It's like a lesbian's Bible.
And another interesting quick side note: Albert Brooks wrote an apocalyptic book called 2030 a handful of years ago.
Really? And you know what's funny is I was thinking about
2030. That's so symbolic, that number.
who's the other Brooks? Mel Brooks. So Mel Brooks' son did the whole
World War Z.
World War Z series.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know
Max,
that.
Yeah. Max Brooks.
Wow.
That's
Spaceballs. Oh, what a great movie.
Oh my God, yeah.
Blazing Saddles. Come on.
Blazing Saddles is good too, but Spaceballs is top 10.
Yeah. Well, Blazing Saddles was co-written. What's it? Richard Pryor.
Another Rick Moranis
Pryor,
movie. Shout out to Rick Moranis.
Yes.
I know Rick Moranis needs to do another Honey, I Shrunk the Kids or something. I
He
feel like
retired.
his wife
his
got
wife
some.
died.
He got
Yeah.
he
Died
got
of
jumped
cancer.
in
He wound
the
up watching
Central
the
Park,
kids.
right? Remember he
Yeah.
got jumped in
Oh, he
Central
got
Park?
jumped. That's right.
Yeah, he did.
So two things I made mental note that we didn't get to was, I think it's pronounced Hussey
Pussy?
instead of Hussey.
Oh, hussy.
Hussey. Then it would have to be a huge pussy, right? Hussey. What is the flashing going on, Thomas? It's freaking me out. I feel like I'm having epileptic seizures here.
What
I've
flashing?
got a light that's
Or
like
being
on the
programmed. It's like
fritz.
certain programming. Like is it a programming?
Neurolinguistic.
Neurolinguistic programming.
It's working.
Yeah.
MK Ultra.
You're gonna cry tomorrow about a childhood trauma, but your life will be
Yeah,
so much better
again.
after that.
You're welcome, by the way.
Gary Busey.
Gary-
That's
Oh,
different
God,
than
Gary
pussy.
Busey.
That's not a huge pussy. That's just a big pussy.
Dude.
A pussy.
I don't
There's
like that
so much
word.
waiting to be told about Gary
What
Busey.
one?
Gary Busey.
Pussy.
You don't like
Because
that word?
yeah, I
What
said
about
in
if
the
I say
chat,
it like this? Pussy.
because it's pus that has the word pus in it. The pussy is nothing like pus.
Well, you know, they actually
I've never
pussy-
linked that before.
Me either. Never once.
Like, why the fuck?
Ever. I've never thought about it, and I
Yeah.
can't believe
Pussy.
you just everybody. I like
The English
Sorry,
language,
Elizabeth.
y'all.
like forget about that
Yeah,
ever
go back.
happened.
No, we have to scratch the whole episode. It's all
You will be
gone.
able to find this episode on YouTube. So
I've
I
never
like
heard of it,
puns
but yeah,
better.
pussy, right? That's what you're saying.
Pussy.
Oh God, I can't unhear that.
But it's true. What the
Layla
fuck?
Ann. I don't even know your middle name, but it just felt
I
like
don't have one. I should give myself one.
Layla Marie. That
Layla
seems like
Marie.
every since we're having the mafia.
My niece is named Layla. It's Layla Grace.
Layla Grace.
Layla Grace. Layla Grace. That's what we'll call you if you're from Tennessee. Layla Grace. But don't ever say that again.
Hey, that's the English language. Apparently, when you add a Y behind two S's, it just changes the
It's a
entire.
vowel. It's sometimes Y is a vowel.
Exactly. In this case, it's a sometimes.
But they actually used to, call cats pussies, but they used to call rabbits pussies. And they used to call rabbits hares.
Harry?
Hares. I just think it's weird. I always thought the beaver was the weirdest one. Not to totally derail, but that one never made sense to me.
It's all right.
And to be honest, there was a mob guy, a real life mob guy whose nickname was Pussy. I think he got whacked though. I think it was a guy out of Jersey. So it might have been
you'd have to
they
be-
used that
Pussy,
for.
and then the beaver. It was the
Yeah, I
pussy
think
got
his name
knocked
was
off by the
Anthony.
beaver.
I think his name was Anthony Russo, and they called him Pussy, which God only knows.
Wow.
I know you almost
God only
wonder
knows.
if you'd have to be really tough to have that name or picked on by everybody. It has to be
Oh,
one
it'd be
or
like
the
being
other.
called. It'd be like, why do I got to be Mr. Pink? Like I mean, it's one of those names where it's like, oh shit. Like I mean, but then again, there's been guys who've had nicknames that are again bestowed on them that are not complimentary. Like you had in Chicago, you had Tony the Ant Spilatro. That wasn't a name he bestowed. It was because an FBI agent called him a piss ant. And then eventually it was in the newspapers, Tony the Ant Spilatro, till his death.
What about Scarface?
Or yeah.
Say hello
Well,
to my little friend.
Capone got that because he was hitting on another mob guy's lady and he got cut in the face for it. And what's name? I mean, technically Luciano could have been called Scarface because he, one of his enemies slashed his face and actually led to, I think he had a drooping eye.
I was going to say, didn't he have
because of
that messed up eye? He's all
Yeah.
the whole time.
Yeah.
Because
Might have been the reason why I frequented prostitutes the most, because that might have been the only amount of women who were willing to hang out with him at that point.
Yeah, you notice in interviews and stuff, he would always like put that eye away, that
Yeah.
part of his face.
I think they said it was Legs Diamond, the gangster Legs Diamond, who did that to him, to Lucky Luciano,
Legs
which is
Diamond.
how he got the. I mean, he got the nickname from that. Yeah. Who was another one who had an unflattering nickname? There was a guy, LA guy. His name was. His first name was Aladina, but they called him Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano.
See, these are all
And
great
he's
names.
Yeah, but the Weasel, that's not a name he wanted, but yeah, and actually one of the guys he'd be eventually implicated in murdering was a guy named Frank Bonpensiero, and they used that name for Big Pussy in The Sopranos.
And they have names like, it'll be like Jimmy the Nose or Vinny two times because he says everything 2 times.
I'm gonna go get the papers. Get the papers.
42 shoes, because he's got 2 shoes at a time. It's crazy.
Well, in that scene when you're seeing all those guys that Henry's introducing you to, one of them is Louis Eppolito, who would be one of the mafia cops, who'd be implicated in more than a handful of murders and would die behind bars. And Eppolito he touted how his family was the mafia. Wrote a book called Mafia Cop, and his family was in the Gambinos, and a couple of them, I think one was named Jimmy the Clam Eppolito. And father and son would be murdered because they were involved in, I think, running some sort of healthcare scam or something where one of them got their picture taken with Rosalind Carter, recently departed.
He's with everyone, Jim Jones and
John Wayne Gacy. And Paul Castellano took the public embarrassment of them being named. Like, I think they were named on like 60 Minutes. And he had them both killed.
Okay, if you were nefarious,
okay,
you're all in the mafia right now, and you're nefarious, and you have to like have your calling card for the way you off someone. What would it be? Like, I think I would, after I off someone, like it would be clean, but then I would put their phone at their face and open their porn history and leave it on their chest.
Hot oil in the ear.
They'd be dead and you just put hot oil in their ear?
No, I'll kill them with hot oil in their ear. Sleep.
Oh, okay.
Boom.
Are we just coming up with creative ways to kill people now?
No,
I was having a calling card. I
That's
wasn't like how they die is whatever. I just what would be your calling card? Like, or you had you leave like your sliced apple, or you leave a rose on their chest.
Right.
Those.
Or you could do the U.S. I think the U.S. Army. I think in Vietnam used to leave like some sort of cards on the dead Viet Cong. I think they killed. I think there was something leaving
A tarot
like
card,
some sort of, or like poker card, something like that. I think
a My Little Pony.
That would really corrupt people.
The brony killer.
Yeah, dude, that actually is scaring me already. I'm already thinking about how terrifying that is.
You're like, I already wrote a comic book in my head.
Oh, God.
I guess I'll get like a 10-sided dice. Is that a thing? A 10-sided dice?
There is. Yeah.
I
It'll be more typical for a 20.
Yeah, a 10 or a 20-sided dice, and just like have it set up on certain numbers and leave coded messages through the numbers so they can like figure out what I'm trying to say through my killings.
I would draw on their face with a permanent marker, but it would be like different drawings every time. Like sometimes they get a spot, and sometimes they get a little Hitler mustache. And
I thought we were just talking about a dick on the face.
Yes, maybe that would be some of them, like right here. I'm with stupid pointing down.
Well, I mean, the mob, there has been some symbolism. Like if they found there was infamous murder, I think it was Vinny the Chin might have been behind it, but it was in the early 1980s, the Philly mob had like a war. And the first murder that started off was the murder of Angelo Bruno, who had been the boss for like 21 years. And they called him like the gentle Don, the docile Don, because not much happened in his term. Like murders were very, very rare. And he gets murdered by his consigliere, this guy, Tony Caponegro, who thought he had permission from the Genovese family.
Whoa. I'm going to have to draw the line there.
Wait,
We're not allowed to go dropping the N word on Secret Society of Good Guys. Sorry. Just kidding.
And so he gets killed. And so this guy, Tony Caponegro, goes to the Genovese family, and they're like, we didn't sign off on that. And he's there with his brother-in-law. They find him and his brother-in-law dead with $100 bills jammed up their orifices.
Oh.
Yeah. Every now and then there's been some symbology. The guy that I was telling you about who killed Tommy DeSimone, this guy Bruno Facciola, they found him dead with a canary in his mouth.
Oh, singing like a little canary.
Yeah, they were wrong. He wasn't. They just thought he was. Yeah.
My favorite killings was probably the way that he left things was what's his fucking name? Hannibal Lecter in that show. I don't know if you guys seen the show Hannibal Lecter with that actor, that French actor. I forgot his name.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's the guy who was in. Wasn't he the one that took over Johnny Depp's role?
Was
it French or was he Swedish?
I think. I don't know.
I'm trying to think if Hannibal's the guy who took over and was in.
Very suave.
Casino Royale with what's his name?
I think that's right. Hannibal.
I might be wrong.
It's called, right? Hannibal.
Yeah, Hannibal.
With the cast. Oh my God, Mads Mikkelsen. There you go.
Yep, that's the guy. That's the guy.
Okay, in that show, the killings and how they knew it was from one particular killing is the design of his killings. It was like artwork. Like, it was like crazy, disgusting artwork, but at the same time, it was like, yo, this is fucking incredible. Like taking the fucking guts of a human and creating like fucking violin strings out of human guts and then creating the most perfect pitch of music with it was just like it was art. If you understand that, I guess you'll understand why it's art, but some people will be like, how the fuck are you calling that art? But no, it was artistic, very artistic.
The two books that I'd read almost on top of each other were Murder Machine, which is about the DeMeo crew and the Gambinos, and they would kill someone and then they would hang their bodies like over there was a bathtub in their club, and while they let the body drain, they'd eat pizza, do this and that, and then because of Roy DeMeo's butcher history, they'd cut up the body, and then eventually they'd call it doing the Houdini, get rid of the body. It'd wind up like in the local landfill and then eventually taken away. Another group that was connected with them that was good at doing that was the Westies, which were the Irish mob in New York, and they were notorious.
They use swabs too a lot of times.
Dude who worked for a car pressing place, and he would get certain money off hours to turn on the car presser, whatever it was, car compaction, and turn the other way. And he was like a young kid in his 20s and lived up in New England, like New York area, and New Jersey area, and would just
dude, these people, like, man, do you understand? Like, how do these men take on that stress? Number one, of like always like looking over your shoulder. Number two, like cutting body parts apart, shooting people, like beating them to death, like fucking cutting their throats.
That's what I was gonna ask. Is there any occult in this, where they're doing ritual at all, or is it all just kind of like no rules?
I think to a degree, it's almost like organized chaos. You know, there is rules because, you know, you're not supposed to kill a made man without getting permission. You know, if you're a made guy, if you're an associate, you're not supposed to touch anybody, but which is what happens to Tommy and Goodfellas in real life. But in terms of how brutal killings are, I think that can be open for interpretation. I mean, when you had Murder Inc., you know, the group that was mostly Jewish gangsters, but also some Italians that were connected to a guy named Lepke Buchalter and Albert Anastasia, that kind of enforced a lot of the stuff in regards to like the garment industry in the 30s and 40s and the docks. They did, ice picks. They did brutal murders. Might have dropped as many as 1,000 bodies over time until they got caught, and then a bunch of the guys got the electric chair. And the main witness against them eventually was thrown out a 6th floor window, and because he would have given up not only, I think, the mobsters, he might have given up politicians. But they called him
case of suicide I ever seen.
the canary. They called him the canary that could sing but couldn't fly.
Sounds like the kill list of the Clintons. You know,
The Clinton body count.
the suicides.
Oh yeah, I mean, how many suicides can you have? I mean,
Suicide.
someone posted something on Twitter
Epstein.
yesterday, and it was like, oh, there's at least 70 bodies, and I said, I think it's more than that, and it could probably rival the Kennedy assassination witnesses or suspects at this point.
Yeah, recently there's a suspect who was against Epstein, who died actually 6 months ago in May, who was recently put on the news, who was a witness against Epstein. She was found in a hotel, kind of overdosed on drugs and suicided herself. And there was another one, I think a year or two ago, who was against Epstein. She also was suicided in a hotel room. So it's like all these fucking suicides and heart attacks are not really self-inflicted or magically, naturally happened.
Well, not everything could be a karate chop to the neck like the Kennedy assassination witnesses. That was my favorite of every one of those suspicious deaths, karate chop to the neck.
Yeah?
As a guy stepped out of the shower, karate chop to the throat. That's how
Karate
it's
chop?
listed. Yeah, three guys got access to Jack Ruby's apartment after Jack Ruby shot Oswald. Now, Jack Ruby was mob connected, even though they try to say he wasn't. He was. Chicago and Dallas mob. And so his roommate, because Ruby, I think, was barely closeted. I mean, Ruby, I think, was definitely gay.
And he was Jewish?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jacob Rubenstein. Yep.
Yeah.
And shortened it. I think there was someone who I think was like tribute him shortening his name, something like that. But when these three men were let into his apartment, I don't know what they saw, but within 3 years, all of them were dead. And yeah, one got shot by a cop by accident. The cop was just handling his gun and shot this guy who was a reporter. And the other guy got a karate chop. And then another one was like a sudden death.
Well, there's a connection between Jack Ruby and George Hunter White, I believe, as well, because George Hunter White bust one of Jack Ruby's clubs up, I think. And it had something to do with smuggling guns to Cuba at some point. I'm a little hazy on the fine details.
Ruby visited Trafficante in jail when Trafficante was arrested, thrown in jail by Castro. And the Warren Commission didn't want to get into that. Like there was a thing about with Oswald in Mexico and Ruby's connections, where they're like, we're supposed to be closing doors, not opening new ones. And Ruby's, gun running was not something they wanted to get into. Or his connections. There was a guy named Louis McWillie who was kind of like a connected guy and connected to Trafficante. And I mean, Ruby only gave up so much. I think when he started talking, he has rapidly, he has cancer all of a sudden, right after he's granted a retrial. And he's dead. And supposedly after, I think, a visit from Jolly West, the CIA connected doctor, and who figures into a lot of things lately. And I mean, Tucker Carlson even named him on something because West was involved in a lot of stuff. But George Hunter White, I mean, that was a guy, I mean, as dirty as they come. I mean, this is a guy who I think dosed his own wife with LSD. Like he was a guy who was just a total scumbag.
I mean, LSD is fun. So she probably had a good time, no?
I don't know. The doses that they were operating with weren't just like fun doses.
Oh, no?
No, they were like make you go insane doses and like send bombs to people in the mail kind of doses.
There was a guy who popped up. He was actually a federal marshal who said he was at a Christmas party and he had a drink, but he wasn't a big drinker, and then leaves this party, and then next thing you know, holds up like a bar or something, did something completely contrary to what he was. And he's positive that George Hunter White dosed his drink. because that was the whole thing, was dosing people unsuspectingly, and kind of like what happened to Frank Olson. I mean, Frank Olson, they put LSD in his Cointreau when he was, at like a gathering of CIA and Army doctors and stuff like that, Fort Detrick people, and then within I think about a week and a half, he's dead. Suicide, but not. He was thrown out a window, and there was so many
a bulletproof window that didn't open.
Yeah, they said the only way he could have jumped out the window is if he had a running start and dove out the window, as opposed to opening the window and just jumping out. Meanwhile, the guy who was in the room with him said, "Oh, he only came to only realized it after the fact." But he didn't even call the emergency authorities first. He called the CIA first.
Huh. The family, they got paid out for that, right? Like just over the last few years.
The Olsen family? They were given a payout in the 70s.
Okay.
So Gerald Ford, our FBI informant / accidental president, had revealed certain things that had been coming out because they were trying to do damage control about CIA, the family jewels, as they called it, like the horrors in the CIA closet that William Colby eventually released, and might have figured 20 years later in Colby getting killed. And Ford had let slip off the record, even though that didn't do any good, saying something about assassinations and stuff, like just in the CIA's past. And eventually, I think it was, if not the Washington Post, New York Times comes out. I think it was Seymour Hersh actually came out with it, talking about the CIA's House of Horrors, and they mention the suicide of an Army doctor. And so at some point, Frank Olson's family figures out that it's him, even though they've been lied to about his death for years. And so Ford is counseled by two of his men, Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, pay him off. Like, there's a document in the book, A Terrible Mistake, which is like a 900-page book. It's a brilliant book. And saying, pay them. And it was actually an act of Congress. They actually lowered the amount. They were supposed to give them $1 million. I think they talked it down to $500,000. And Eric Olson, who I think is the only one left, there was two sons, still were like, it's murder. We want it looked into. And they've gone back. I mean, the murder's, 70 years old. It was 70 years old last week. November 28th is when Olson wound up on the ground from the Statler Hotel in the city. And, Hank Albarelli, the author of that book, got the New York Manhattan DA, Robert Morgenthau, who was like DA forever, to look into it. To reopen the case. And Albarelli was talking to two retired CIA people, and Morgenthau's office was like, we want them to go on the record. And he's like, they give up everything if they go on the record. So they're like, all right, well, then we're closing the case. And that was it. So case just is considered a suicide, even though signs point to murder. Olson was not going to go along with what the CIA wanted. This is back when Allen Dulles was early on in his directorship of the CIA. And Olson was a threat, because at one point he literally said, just let me go. They wanted to commit him, and he wouldn't go, and they threw him out the window.
What's the difference between a cartel and a mafia?
Well, cartel actually goes, that term goes back to like big oil, like back when like Standard Oil, the early like John D. Rockefeller, goes into that. They used to call like kind of like a group. It's basically like a group together for illegal purposes, because in the end, oil was kind of to monopolize the oil industry. Like, your interests are too powerful to be allowed to stand. So that's why they broke up, I think, Standard Oil at one point, because it was a cartel. But when we talk about the drug cartels, I think it was kind of like organizing. Because again, what was it? It wasn't Pablo Escobar's cartel. It was the Medellin cartel. It was the Cali cartel, even though in the end, the Medellin cartel was the more infamous one, because it was Pablo Escobar, Carlos Lader, who was Diego in Blow. And the story goes, when George Young, that Johnny Depp played in that, I think it's a deleted scene in the movie. He testifies against Diego, against Carlos Lader. Pablo Escobar gave him permission to do that.
Really?
And yeah, because, Lader went nuts. He has disappeared in and out of like, he might have been in witness protection, Carlos, later at one point. He's still alive as far as I know, but he's been like, people didn't even know where he was because I think he might have been involved in like covert ops. They all were. I mean, who was it? If you ever read Barry and the Boys, about Barry Seal, the guy who operated out of Mena Airport in Arkansas, and the one that they made that Tom Cruise movie, American Made.
American Made, yeah.
Yeah, Unlimited Hangout. They wanted to call it Mena. That was the original title, but apparently that wasn't going to fly with certain people. And because, you know, I'm sure that script got passed by the CIA's entertainment liaison and the Pentagon's entertainment. With Barry Seal, he said he had proof that he had on video George W. Bush and Jeb Bush offloading a plane with drugs. Like that Barry Seal never thought he'd do real hard time because he said he had Poppy Bush's kids, you know, cold. And that only went so far. Then, you know, then he was murdered, and then everybody pointed the finger at the cartels. They said it was Escobar's. You know, I mean, they put Barry Seal in a halfway house and said he couldn't have any protection and he couldn't have any weapons, and literally said you have to be home at 6 o'clock every night. So kind of just saying when he'd be home at the latest, and then he gets pretty much assassinated. I mean, I've seen the pictures. I mean, they got him. I mean, that was a hit, if anything else. And they're like, nope, Colombians. And Barry Seal, talking about the government as organized crime, Barry Seal had, I think they said in his bank accounts, billions. And the U.S. government took all that, took every dime of that money. And
yeah, this is like this is like GTA when you run over the hooker and take your money back.
Hey, everybody's got a use, you know, and then when that use is up, you know, they could either, you know, just put you behind bars and just hope you never come out, or they take care of you in another way.
Well, it seems to happen a lot with the mafia is the people who have to go against the mafia, because the mafia is so they've infiltrated everything that you can't have any record that you ever did the thing. So they always are like, you don't exist anywhere. If we delete your record, you don't have any power. You don't work for anyone. So you see guys like Barry Seal, or even in The Departed, where they're like, you're so off record and so off the books that you're not really a cop. Like you're not really an agent. So it's just like one delete and your whole record's gone. There's no record of you in the police academy, and there's no record of you getting hired here. We pay you off books. And so it just seems like there's a lot of that goes on.
Well, they talk about, I think in Intelligence, they talk about being sheep dipped. And I think like in The Departed, that's what they do to DiCaprio, you know, like he washes out of the Stadies or whatnot. And then, you know, the only people who know, it's, as what they say, compartmentalized. You know, the only people who know are Queenan and Dignam. You know, that's it, you know, which is, you know, kind of brilliant in a way. But at the same time, those two guys, if those two guys go, you're screwed. You know,
no one knew you were here.
Well, so speaking of, you know, we're talking Forrest Gump, but in a mafia related story, there's a guy, and it's probably hard to find online, but I read, hold on. At first, there was a book I read years ago, Defrauding America. And it was about a guy who was like an FAA whistleblower, but then he got introduced to a lot of other covert government stuff. And he mentions a guy named Albert Carone. And Albert Carone was a one-time cop who at some point got involved with the mafia, but also was like good friends with William Casey, CIA director, and he's a New York guy. And years later, he apparently had a falling out with someone who might have been Oliver North and some other people, and dies a few years later of like a fast cancer. And his daughter, Desiree, sees his like grave marker and doesn't know his service in the army. And so one of the people she calls is a guy named Ted Shackley. And Ted Shackley was called the Blonde Ghost. He was one of the most powerful people in the CIA. And he'd eventually get, he eventually would be kicked out around the time Jimmy Carter's guy, Stansfield Turner, took over and started getting rid of a lot of the covert cowboys of the CIA. And within a week or so, maybe a month at the most, that grave marker got changed. But later on, Desiree, the daughter, winds up filing suit against the United States government in relation to her father, and I guess just to try to unearth documents. I think she named Bush, H.W. Bush, in it, because this guy was connected to a lot of things. And at one point, the judge called Carone like the Forrest Gump of like covert ops, that he was like in so many different places. Like this is a guy, like I've read one of the affidavits in relation to Albert Carone, and it puts him in Dallas in '63. It puts him involved in Operation Watchtower, which involved Colombia and drug running, and the 70s and 80s, and involved the infamous murder up in Massachusetts, involving a guy who's special forces guy's wife, and that the guy's doing time for, kind of like a Jeffrey McDonald.
You think a lot of this could be rewriting of history, like how much they're giving us of these certain characters, where they're like, if we just change these, we'll give them 80%, but we got to keep this 20% like whitewashed a little bit.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. I think there's always, I mean, what are the chances most of these books or movie? I mean, first of all, they say with Hollywood movies that are true stories, it's 85% true. I'm like, sometimes I think it's 15% true. It could be like the movie Fargo, where it says this is a true story and all this stuff. And when they asked the Coen brothers about it, he's like, well, yeah, there was a kidnapping, and yeah, someone was put in a wood chipper, but they're like, yeah, the rest is kind of bullshit. So it's like, really, it was more like 10% is true, 90% is fiction. I think in a lot of these cases, I think, yeah. I mean, when everybody starts claiming that they killed Jimmy Hoffa, you start wondering, well, like, do I even care anymore? I'm like, I know I do, but when a guy like Frank Sheeran says he did it, and then a guy named Tony, what was his name? Donald Frankos, they called him Tony the Greek, who was a self-professed hitman, did it. Richard Kuklinski did it. I was like, after a while, I'm like, do I care? And it's like, most people would say I tap out, or The Irishman, that's the end for me. De Niro did it, not even knowing the actual guy's name. And I mean, Sheeran says, I took part in Jimmy Hoffa's murder. I took part in Crazy Joe Gallo's murder. I did like all these hits, and it's like, it's just your word. Your word. Everybody else is dead.
You know what's interesting?
I always like how Layla starts. I always like,
it just blows my mind. You have
like
to be
prep.
some.
You know what I was thinking?
For real though, Cheney.
No, anything. I'm just like,
it's like, what kind of human do you have to be to have that kind of mindset to like almost be programmed, or is it, what kind of like program is it, like to kill people for drugs and this and that, and create these cults almost, and like, they fear me. It's like almost like a fucking movie, but you're living it out. But what kind of human truly do you have to be to live that lifestyle? And it's usually men who choose to live like that. And it's almost like barbaric, like to want to kill people for like things that are like drugs, money. Like, I understand for honor, like killing for honor and all that makes sense to me. I find that honorable when a man kills for honor. But for bullshit like that, it's like, what kind of human do you have to be to like do that?
That's what
when
I
you
thought
think
it was
about it
interesting
deeply,
from like Goodfellas, where Karen, she says, even, I like how they do the movie with his talk over and then her talk over, where she's like, I knew what he was up to. Like, I knew he didn't do this stuff, but I liked how everyone treated him. I liked how, like when they walk through the back of the restaurant and they're like, we got your table right here, right by the stage. And they carry the table all the way up for them, that it's like nobody could have sat in their table, because they actually are carrying it with a tablecloth for them to the front of the stage. So she's like, I knew better. Like, even though she didn't know the details, she knew.
We've had that happen a few times going out when I was younger, like to these Albanian night events, and they couldn't find a babysitter, so they would take me along. And I love dancing anyway, but it was like a nightclub for like Albanian people. So when my dad and his crew would show up, full house, nope, they'd bring a table out right in the middle, bring all the chairs up. It was like, yeah, you can't fuck with these people. And then everybody like, who are they? And I didn't know what the hell it was about, but the guy that my father was with was the reason why, because he's involved in some shit currently in the United States today. I'm not saying any names, but yeah.
All about respect.
Yeah,
Chat
exactly.
asked about is this a name that rings a bell to you?
I think he's saying Joey Gallo, which is Crazy Joe. Is that who we're talking about?
I don't know.
Gallows.
We'll see what they
Wow.
write in the chat, Seth.
My dad worked for a real estate guy. Well, his name was Gallo, Phillip Gallo. He's Italian from Long Island, and he owned lots of real estate in New York City. He's a really nice guy. Rest his soul. God rest his soul.
I mean, the
He was
Gallo
part of that.
brothers.
Yeah.
The Gallo brothers were interesting guys. I mean, it was Crazy Joe Gallo, his brother Larry, and then there was Albert, who was called Kid Blast. They would be portrayed in Godfather 2. There was the Rosado brothers, who Frankie Pantangeli, who's like one of the guy who takes over the street operations of the Corleone family, has to make peace with against his own wishes that Michael Corleone asks him to. And in real life, the Gallos, Joe and his brother took part in, see my cousin Vinny reference, and they took part in the Albert Anastasia hit in '57. But the Gallos were in the Profaci family, and Joe Profaci was a well-known tightwad. He took more than he gave as a boss, and he made promises to the Gallos he didn't fulfill. So the Gallos started kidnapping associates. They kidnapped Profaci's brother-in-law, Joe Magliacco. They're like, all right, you make the deal with us, give us what we deserve, territory-wise or whatnot, we'll give them back. And they'd give them back, and then they'd renege. And then one of Gallo's associates, Carmine Persico, would earn his nickname by turning on the Gallos, and he'd become Carmine the Snake and fight against the Gallo brothers. And one of the guys with the Gallos, a guy named Joe Jelly, would disappear, and the Gallos would get a delivery of a coat with the fish in it. And that's the Luca Brasi reference from The Godfather, that Joe Jelly sleeps with the fishes.
Joe Jelly.
Joe Jelly. Yep. The
The
Gallo
horse
brothers.
head is kind of can you imagine waking up next to your horse's head?
If anybody deserved it, it was that guy in The Godfather.
And it was a real horse's head.
What?
Yeah,
Poor
they used a
horse.
real horse's head in that scene.
Poor baby.
Yeah, it was,
Gross.
I mean, that's such a great
Gross.
movie.
So what about biker gangs, biker mafia? That's a big thing around here too.
I like our gang.
That's the thing about Tucson. It used to be it was Italian and it was biker and it was Mexican, and now it's like kind of this weird conglomeration. I don't know about any other places. But,
Bloods and Crips.
So in the U.S., I don't really know about as much in terms of alliances between biker gangs and organized crime. I mean, and like the mafia. In Canada, that was a big thing. In Montreal, Vito Rizzuto, who was the guy who was connected to the Bananos, he would make an alliance with the bikers. I think it was like a Hell's Angels offshoot up in Canada, and that they actually did a like a series on that called Bad Blood with who was it? Anthony LaPaglia played Vito Rizzuto. You had Kim Coates, who was if any of you guys saw Sons of Anarchy, he played Tig in Sons, and it was actually one of Paul Sorvino's last roles. And Vito Rizzuto had managed to create some sort of like alliance between the bikers, Haitian gang, and an Irish gang to kind of keep peace. And then Rizzuto goes to jail based on the murder of the 3 Bonanno captains in 1981, which they show in Donnie Brasco. And Rizzuto was given up by Joe Massino, the boss of the Bonannos, who became the biggest rat ever. And Rizzuto goes to jail I think he wound up in Colorado. And then that war has been going on since then. They've been fighting a war for close to 20 years. I mean, yeah.
Do you have a show on any of this? Why don't
Not
you?
yet.
You should do one. You know a lot, and there's a lot of people who are interested in the topic of the mob. You know,
and there's still so much. I mean, it's a crazy fun topic. I liked the movies when I was younger. I think the first mob book I ever saw was Gangland, which was about how the FBI got John Gotti. And the cover of it was a chart of the Gambino hierarchy. And there was just something about it, and it just kind of looked cool. And I'd heard John Gotti, I'd seen some things here and there. And, you hear those tapes, the Gotti tapes. And I said, there's a lot of bravado there, but you also knew he was a guy who was willing to kill. And, they just did a Netflix thing, a 3-part thing called Getting Gotti. And it was talking about the law enforcement effort, which, by the way, they all stepped on each other. So they should have worked together. They would have got him sooner. But you listen to him, talk about, this, you tell this young punk, me, John Gotti. I'm like, okay, well, sever your mother fucking head off, and it's like, probably would have done it. He was a guy who was not afraid. I think he chopped up the guy who ran over his son. That guy disappeared off the face of the earth, and just as he was about to move. And I still think Junior's involved, even though he said he quit. He said, I don't, I know there are some who supposedly quit the mafia. Like there's, what's his name? Michael Francis, who's has his own YouTube channel, him and Sammy Gravano. But, I don't think some of these guys are capable. John Gotti Jr. should be in jail for life for murder, but managed to skate on that.
The communication the mob and the mafia truly have through eyes is unreal. Like each type of eye gesture, movement, facial expression connected with the eyes, they knew exactly what the other member was saying just through not saying a word, no body movement, just through eyes. It is that they know. It's crazy. It's crazy to see.
I think that's how they can smell someone who you don't want to do business with. I think there's certain things you can, not even just being like, this one's, a friend of ours, a friend of mine. I think there's certain, and that could just be part of when you've been raised in that, a tradition,
Mm-hmm. And Phillip knows a ton about the mafia, but he knows a ton about everything. It's wild. Like no matter what topic, I could just be like, oh, what about this? Or any post that if I'm just randomly coming across something, he'll give me all this other stuff. Like, how I'll ask a bunch of questions. He always answers them. Nobody else answers them. He just answers them off the top of his head. And then he's like, did you also know this? And then I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
What about rock music overlap with mafia? I heard a lot. I've heard all sorts of theories that they kind of ran some rock groups.
Really?
So I just said with Michael Francis, his dad, Sonny, who lived to over 100 years old. He only died like a few years ago. He was involved not with rock groups necessarily. He was involved more with like some of your like Motown groups, and it was more like record distribution, things like that. The guy on The Sopranos, Hesh, who was, like Tony's dad's friend and, was close to Tony up until like the last season. He was based on a guy named Morris Levy, who was like a mob guy who was connected to record companies. I was telling Cheney at one point, the guy who played Tootie in Goodfellas, Frank DeLeo, that was Michael Jackson's manager.
Really?
For a handful of years.
Well,
and at one point had to fight off other mob families' attempts to try to get a piece of Michael Jackson. There was a guy actually close out by me, a guy named Philly Bazile, who was mob connected, owned a bunch of like bars and nightclubs. He was involved with a group called Vanilla Fudge. That was like a 60s, 70s metal group. His clubs, they were all mob owned. He was connected to Paul Vario, Paul Cicero from Goodfellas. And he would eventually be involved with the burning down of a club called the Oak Beach Inn in Island Park. It was called the OBI. There was a main one. So Oak Beach is right near where the Gilgo Beach murders. That was where that first disappearance led to the other connected deaths. Yeah, I know. Rabbit hole and rabbit hole.
That's Amityville too,
West,
is it not? Isn't that the same area as Amityville?
A little bit of a distance, but yeah, like, so where I'm initially from is the most western portion of Long Island. Long Beach, the city by the sea, is like the westernmost part before you get to Queens and other stuff. Where I live now is the eastern end. So Ocean Parkway is like a huge like area going from Nassau County to Suffolk. Along that way is Gilgo Beach and Oak Beach. Oak Beach is a very closed area, but Oak Beach was where they had this bar, the Oak Beach Inn. The guy who ran it was so successful, he opened like 2 or 3 other locations, and one was called the OBI West. The OBI West was Island Park. My father worked there. I think he did like, just bar work or whatnot. It was before my dad became a cop. And Henry Hill burnt down the OBI West. That's the bar that they show, the Bamboo Lounge or whatever in the movie that he burns down with Tommy, the place that they bust out. You light a match. That was the OBI West. And so there and this guy Philly Bazile though, like he owned a bunch of these bars, bunch of rock bands. I think Cream even played out there, Eric Clapton's group. And they were just like, yeah, some of these guys you could always tell the mob connected guys who would screw you over.
And then did you hear that Eric Clapton's son, he narked on a few people? You know what happened to him.
I never heard that.
I'm just saying they might have thrown him right out a window.
Yeah. What is the tie between the mafia and casinos in Atlantic City?
So
I know Donald Trump owns casinos there, and a lot of mob activity involved with the production of Atlantic City.
Atlantic City, have you seen Boardwalk Empire?
Parts of it, not all of it.
Okay. So there's such a huge disconnect. So when Atlantic City being like the Boardwalk Empire, like just being beautiful, picturesque in the, the 20s and 30s, maybe even in the 40s, that was gone by the 60s and 70s. It was like Siberia. Like Nicky Scarfo, who'd become the Philly mob boss, was banished there after he killed a longshoreman over a seat at a diner. But then when they decided to pass the resolution to bring casino gambling in, they're like, oh, this is our chance. Even though the governor made this huge speech, tell the organized crime, keep the hell out of our casinos, keep the hell out of our state. Well, they did get involved with the unions. They never got as full in as the mob did in Vegas or other places like the Bahamas and other places like that, Cuba. But they were involved in like the hotel, restaurant employees union, things like that, like unions that catered to the casinos. Atlantic City does have a black book, the list of excluded persons, and you're not allowed to be in there at all. You could be, you could be thrown out immediately. The casino can be fined, whatnot. I mean, that was a thing that in Casino that De Niro's character fights. Joe Pesci's character fights, and then eventually that actually did happen to De Niro's real life counterpart, who was banned from entering a casino. But yeah. They could never get a toehold, even though New Jersey's government is notoriously corrupt. Yeah. And, it doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, whether it be a John Corzine, Goldman Sachs, or whether it be Big Boy Christie.
Wasn't RoboCop set in future New Jersey?
I don't know.
And it was run by Mafia.
Detroit, but then again, I don't know.
Oh, it was Detroit. That's right. It was Detroit. Was it Mafia? I don't remember.
I don't know. I mean, Detroit's Mafia was pretty, that's who figured into the Hoffa murder for a while. Right. I mean, in the end, we still don't know who really gave the order on that, but Detroit's mob was pretty powerful for a while. They all had different names too. Like Detroit, I think their nickname was like the Combination. Chicago was the Outfit. Cleveland, I think, was the Syndicate. They used to call Providence, where Patriarcha was at. Raymond Patriarcha was called the Office. Kind of weird nicknames for these things. But yeah, right. I always like the Dixie Mafia.
Yeah, that's a good name.
Bunch of rednecks and loose, supposedly loose associates. A loose confederation of people. And some try to say it doesn't exist. Some tried to say the Dixie Mafia was a creation of Elmore Leonard, the writer. The writer. Mm-hmm. I was like, no, the Dixie Mafia existed. That's if you've ever seen Walking Tall. Right. That the Buford Pusser. They were called the State Line Mob, but it was the Dixie Mafia.
Buford Pusser.
Yep. And he was killed by them. I mean, in the long
What a
run, I mean, they
pussy.
said it was a car accident.
Not,
but they
I
said
was
they
about
were
to be
in-
say, not to be confused with Buford Pussy.
Well, hey, don't forget, in the remake, he was played by what could be our next president, The Rock.
They're
They were trying
trying.
to
You
groom
were-
him for higher office.
You just mentioned our other almost president, who's President Christie, as I'm going to call him. And does he have any ties to the mafia or family or up? You know, like
he acts like a mafioso. I mean,
Yeah.
that's for sure. But
I'd call
he
him
holds
big
grudges with the
time.
best of them.
I'd be like, hey,
Yeah.
big time, come over here.
Yeah, I'd read a book about him. It just shows that, I mean, he has that mafia mentality. Like, he holds a grudge with the best of them, and he will. I mean, he threw some of his enemies in jail. In his book, I think it was called like Ruthless Ambition, was about him, or Reckless Ambition, something like that. It was years ago. I read it, but it was about a political opponent that Christie had thrown in jail. And of course, you had the whole George Washington Bridge thing, which was definitely a mafia move. You know, you're not doing what I'm going to say. I'm going to shut down my end of the my lane of the bridge, and then some. You know, a couple deaths were attributed to it, and then when you get found out, you give up a couple of your underlings.
Next level mafia
he's-
move, shutting down a whole bridge.
Yeah, I mean, he's Chris Christie. I had doubts about him when he was sucking up to Obama after Sandy. I mean, I think he just goes wherever the winds blow.
Like winds can move him. Yeah.
Have a hell of a time, that's for sure.
The mafia. It's so crazy. But yeah, it does feel like it still goes on now, and it still feels like it's bloodlines now, and it still feels like it's like just under the rug, but it's all still happening.
And to be honest, couldn't the mafia just be a good front man at this point for the government in certain things? You know, blame the mafia for things that they're doing. You know, I mean, going back to that partnership that started with, you know, under benevolent reasons, you know, I put that in quotation marks, with communism and World War II and everything else. And I just think that after a while, yeah, maybe they just serve as the boogeymen. You know, I mean, so with casinos, with Vegas, the mob owned the casinos, but they never owned it where it was like, hey, John Gotti owned this casino. It would be the front man, the guy who had a clean reputation that you couldn't question. So like in Casino, you have Kevin Pollak's character who owns the Tangiers, this guy Philip Green. In real life is a guy named Alan Glick. And they're like, oh, he's a real estate lawyer and this and that. Until they started questioning the front man's integrity and whether he had questionable ties. That's when the problem started. In the movie, it's a partner that he told none of the mob guys about. In real life, it was that, and then later on is when he started trying to exert any sort of authority. And then the mob basically said, you'll never leave this corporation alive if you question any moves we ask.
What are the three mob movies that we all need to see if we're interested in this subject to start? Where like the people are real, like it's close, you know, enough where it starts the rabbit hole.
Goodfellas. I would say you got to do Goodfellas. I would say The Departed. You know, now don't get me wrong. The Departed is technically like a remake. They say it's based off I think it was like a Japanese movie or a Chinese movie called Infernal Affairs. Like there's aspects of it, but the Whitey Bulger mark can't be mistaken in that. And I'd even go, I mean, I'd say you still have to go another Scorsese movie. I'd say you have to go Casino too. Because there is a lot of reality to that movie.
Good
I mean,
movie.
I'd say and to be honest, another one, but fictional, Mean Streets.
Oh, what's
One
that
of
one?
Scorsese's first. That was De Niro, Harvey Keitel.
Oh,
It was like 1973.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
that's so old. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
That was De
I've
Niro. I
seen
even
it
was in
forever.
Godfather
He-
2.
he
when
plays
played
the
young.
informant, right, or something, or he goes undercover.
Now, Mean
is that the
Streets
one with Jodie
Mean Streets?
Foster?
No, that was Jodie Foster was Taxi Driver.
Taxi Driver. Yeah.
Yeah, but Harvey Keitel and De Niro, yeah, they were all three of them. Yeah, were in that one. No, Mean Streets is supposed to be like De Niro is kind of like an up and coming wise guy. Harvey Keitel, I think, just like knows most of the mob guys. Like, it's a little bit more street, you know, without getting like too into it. But it's like it's that environment. It's that sort of culture and background, and just in the end how deadly and unforgiving it can be. I thought of another one, but I don't know if we can really go realistic because it's not really truly a gangster movie. That's Sleepers, which is kind of like half and half with the gangster aspect to it, and whether it's actually true or not. But yeah, no, I would say Sleepers is a great movie. Love that movie. Yeah, I would say Goodfellas, Casino.
Sleepers is a good movie.
Yeah.
Why does that fucking guy always play a fucking rapist, bro?
Who, Kevin Bacon?
Yeah, man. He's such a creepy man. Ugh. His
I always
face.
thought he was creepy.
Yeah,
My whole life.
like perfect rapist face. Like
All you got to see him is say, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" And Animal House. That kind of is the impression right then and there. Yeah, he's played a rapist or a killer in a few movies. He played a child molester
he's in the
in a
one
movie too.
Yeah, the one with
Yeah.
the boys. Like they're not the one with Mark.
Sleepers, he is a child molester too.
Yeah,
but,
that's the one where he is a
but
child
there was a movie
molester.
called The Woodsman, I think, where he's I think it was called.
there's
The
a
Woodsman.
few of them.
And he actually, because later on, like I guess they were interviewing him, and he's like, "Well, they're people too." And it's like, nah, child molester's a piece of shit. Like, yeah, you could say they're people, but they're not. Don't try to humanize them.
Ugh, God.
Phillip,
This might sound a little bit silly, but were there any characters from Dick Tracy that were based on real people, or was that
It's
entirely
not silly. I had
fictionalized?
that.
I was thinking the same thing.
Well, that was based off what, like a comic strip initially. I'm not sure.
Right.
You know, God help you if you look like Prune Face. You know, or but who knows? Like someone like Big Boy Caprice was probably Capone.
And
I mean,
I always
who
figured
knows?
like Flat Top might have existed.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, some of the guys who were in the Chicago outfit, like with Capone, like you had guys who were straight up like insane. Like you had a guy named Jack Machine Gun McGurn, who might have taken part in St. Valentine's Day. They've never really been able to pinpoint who the gunmen were. They said a couple of them might have been from out of town, but the nut jobs that were in Chicago in the 20s and 30s, and not just in Capone's group, but like guys like Bugs Moran, Jaime Weiss, Dean O'Banion, you know, guys like that might have been the inspiration. And of course, I'm sure those writers would never tell. You know, there were people. They were when Scarface was made, the original Scarface. Ben Hecht, who was a Chicago newspaper writer, had to say, no, it's not about Capone. You know, like people had to deny that because people were like, oh, he's going to be offended because it was called Scarface, the shame of a nation. You know, even though some of it was based on loosely on Capone. I wouldn't want to talk about him having any sort of feelings for his sister, which they'd show in that one, and then the Pacino remake. It's creepy as shit. But nowadays, probably standard in some of these movies that are out. But yeah, no, I can't think of any off the top of my head in terms of the Dick Tracy ones. It's been years since I've seen that movie.
Are there any good sleeper mafia movies that tell the good story, but aren't really maybe not?
Find Me Guilty was good. The one with Vin Diesel.
Okay.
Was
he
he
about-
Diesel, what?
Yeah, Vin Diesel is like, I mean, he doesn't look like himself. He's like overweight, and like it was 2006. It was Sidney Lumet who did Dog Day Afternoon and Serpico and Prince of the City, another great movie. And technically is Mafia connected too. It's about them trying the entire New Jersey wing of the Lucchese family. It was 23 guys to be tried. One of the longest running trials in that state's history.
Do you
And
have
about-
some? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. Vin Diesel's character, his name was Jackie D'Norcio, they floated a deal for him to testify. And he's like, I love these guys. They're my family, even though some of them look down on him. He was in jail while everybody else was like free on bond or whatnot. And he represented himself.
Wow.
Yeah,
Huh.
it's a great movie. What's his name's in it too? Peter Dinklage is in it too.
Does he play a little person?
Yes, he does. And he plays one of the defense lawyers, and he's great in that movie. There's a lot of people in it. You're like, holy shit. Alex Rocco, the guy I was telling you about, he was in that movie. Who plays a guy who hates D'Norcio and thinks that he's going to torpedo their chances. And, you know, because at one point he's telling jokes like in front of the jury, and he's got to be like constantly cautioned by the judge. And he almost gets like, severed from the trial. And in the end, is like they were all found not guilty. You know?
Yeah, what's the thing about making jokes too? How cool! Like, you ever watch that clip of Bonanno joking with the press about the body in the back, the body in the trunk. Oh my God. And he's like openly joking to his wife who's walking around the back of the car. It's just after one of his court cases that he won, or one of the ones that he got. What did he get? He got nothing for essentially, I think it was obstruction of justice or something like that. That's about all he did. Yeah. But he's walking out of the court into the car, and the press is all talking to him, and they're like, "Hey," congratulating him kind of. And he's like, "Honey, just make sure they don't see the body in the trunk." And then he gets in the car, and they're all like, "What are you doing, dumb guy?" And it's fun. They do it all in fun. And it's like everybody's in on the joke, and like, what is that about? Is that a charm thing?
I think so. Well, Gotti used to, there was a few reporters he'd interact with on the street. John Miller, who eventually would work for the FBI, and would, he'd be the one who first interviewed Bin Laden later on. He used to, talk to Gotti, and you'd have Gravano pushing the camera out of the way, and Gotti'd be like, "Better behave yourself." But meanwhile, like, they'd still have like some sort of like rapport, and then there'd be some female reporters he'd like open doors for, just be like, "Watch yourself, watch where you're walking," Meanwhile, other guys hide behind newspapers, or there's the great clip there was a Netflix series, Fear City, about the New York mob. And they say to Fat Tony Salerno, "Hey, Mr. Salerno, how you doing today?" "Go fuck yourself." "Thank you very much. You're welcome." Like
these
some of these
names,
guys are certified hard asses.
Gotti, Salerno, Luciano, they have like a frequency to it. Like even when it's like said, it's like something.
Sounds Italian.
Yeah, it's something. Not Italian. There's just a frequency to it. Like when
sounds
you say
a little
it,
greasy.
It's like
Bada bing.
Bada bing, bada boom.
I know it does have a je ne sais quoi, like a
something
gravitas
about-
to it.
Yeah.
They feel like those
Yeah.
names, like they were meant to be powerful. Otherwise, you get a name, or you become like you get your name becomes something, or you get a name like Jimmy the Greek or something.
Well, you hear like even some of the Irish guys, like I hear names like with the Westies. The two top guys were named. One guy's named Jimmy Coonan, and another's Mickey Featherstone. And you're like, you almost hear those names, and it was like those were names. Yeah, he was a guy who was a Vietnam vet, and he came back, and everybody's like, he was the crazy one in the group. And I said, in the end, he's the one who ended up testifying and giving up the rest of the Westies because they screwed him over.
That's a pretty cool last name, Featherstone.
Yeah, Mickey Featherstone and Jimmy Coonan. Jimmy Coonan. You see pictures of Jimmy Coonan, he looks like Sean Penn, and they did a movie about that, like a fictional called State of Grace, and it was what was it? Sean Penn, Robin Wright, that's where they met, Ed Harris, and Gary Oldman.
I have had so many, like I've said bad jokes tonight, but then I've had so many go through my head that I haven't said. I just want to say.
I've held back on a bunch of terrible jokes.
Of terrible.
I like those jokes.
I'm always good for terrible jokes. I'm always in.
I know.
Sometimes you just want to interrupt the flow with like a horrible joke.
I know, and I just feel like if all of them didn't nosedive tonight, I would have taken more shots. But it just all fell so flat that I'm like, I feel like, hey,
that's get developed. You gotta shoot your shot. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes you gotta just take a risk and say something stupid.
Yeah, I get a name like, oh, that's Cheney. No jokes. Don't if you ever.
Cheney Stoneface.
Why do they call it Cheney Stoneface? She always looks like she's laughing. No one else is.
No one else is. She turns on the stone. They call her Medusa.
They call her Medusa around here. Turn us to stone.
We need sound effects.
I know. I'm working on a soundboard. That'll be next. We just got the part of the intro song done, and then
I love it.
get so much.
That was good. I like that.
Yeah, hell yeah, Gordy.
First time ever seeing it. I love it.
I'm so glad it turned out.
Uh-huh.
I'm glad you guys like it. It's really fun.
It's super fun. It's like there's every time I hear a new word in it. But I was singing it in my head for like a week, like just randomly getting something out of my refrigerator. Good guys. So
I'll have to
yes,
do it live.
Gordy's trying to get out of his 3D life. So if anyone needs intros, you can hit Gordy up on his Patreon.
Not yet, but yeah, if you need a jingle.
Yeah,
me
you
know.
can be the jingle man. Hey, that's Gordy Jingles.
Hey, Gordy
Hey.
Jingles!
Gordy Jingles.
Gordy Jingles!
Yeah, everyone will get a real name by the
You
end.
break
of
your
the
knees,
show.
and he writes a song about it. It's great.
Hey,
It's
look at
$100 bill up on
these.
your ass. He talks
Frank
about
Sinatra's
don't
got
look at
stuff.
his wife's big wussy.
Whoosy.
Pussy. Puss.
Phillip, where
Pussy.
can everyone find you?
Well, I'm on Twitter. I'm never going to call it the other name.
Oh, he's
at,
dead naming it.
at Dick Foster, and I have a book blog that I occasionally get to. It's called The Book Lover's Guide. I'll have to send you the link to that. But and pretty much it. I got off Instagram a while ago because that was just inundated with too much stuff. Even though I loved your stuff. I mean, obviously, anytime I got a chance to answer was always fun. But yeah, just I'm still doing a lot of book reviews and stuff like that, and occasionally popping up on podcasts.
Yeah, I love it. I hope you come back and hang out with us. Do you guys have anything going on this week? Paranoid American?
I do. So I already showed this when we started out, but not only do I have this Sweet Hunter Biden sticker, I got a few more of the Hunter Biden party packs. They're all hand numbered. I made 50 of them total. So I've got 39 here. So there's like another 11 left. But yeah, this one, and then this is one of 20 sticker sheets that I had made. I kind of went overboard. I didn't realize the world was going to change, but I have this one, and I've got a whole bunch of other ones that I'll be slowly just posting images of. But there's only one place you're ever going to see this freaking Hunter Biden sticker sheet anywhere, and it's going to be at paranoidamerican.com. So go and check it out.
Love it.
Perfect. And you're always working on cool stuff. I won't drop any of your other cool stuff you're working on until you're ready to release it all.
Oh, well, so yeah, and I've been slowly releasing. I think it's on Spotify now. I would appreciate if anyone has a Spotify account, just search for Adrenochrome Queen and add that to your Spotify playlist. And then I've got one called Hunter Biden, Fuck a Laptop, that should also be on Spotify soon, but it's going through some rejections and back and forth with the name, so we'll see what happens. But
They're going to be great sounds to use, especially as a conspiracy theorist with Hunter Biden, and using that as like your background song too, like to make your clips more interesting and fun. You have to check his shit out. Like they're really good clips to use.
I know. I think they'll be fun on TikTok.
We talked. Someone brought up. I think we were talking about Mina a little bit earlier today, and I finally got a catchy hook about Mina, Arkansas. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it's something like run the train like Don Hunter. Like I can't remember the kids' names. One of them's Don something, and the one's like something Ives.
But it's
like
Don Henry and Kevin Ives.
Okay, so so the hook was run that train like Don Henry, dropping kilos from the skies. Run that train like Don Henry, taking lives like Larry Kevin Ives. But it's like really good. And the verse that comes after is really good. So, anyways, I don't know of anyone else that's writing Mina, Arkansas, rap songs. So we're breaking.
That's good. I like it.
Breaking new ground.
Watch them go viral.
Gordy, you have anything go I think some of them will, and especially on
Yeah, I
TikTok,
think
once
they
they're
will.
broken down into clips and they get into people's heads, and then you have people chanting the choruses of these songs, it will
Yeah.
be so
We got
funny.
the Big D energy one too that we've been working on. I like that one.
I can't. It's so funny. It's made me laugh out loud a few times. I even had to show it to my wife. Anyways, so Gordy, you have anything going on this week?
I just want to say thanks to the spiders. I want to shout out to good old spiders. Jim and Rachel sent me a flat Toberfest shirt and some bunch of stickers. Look how bitchin'
Here,
this.
wait. I'm gonna move it so you
Oh.
can. Oh, okay.
Look how bitchin' that is. Of course, this one reminded me of Abby.
Oh yeah.
And hold up the T-shirt again.
The T-shirt just disappeared. What happened?
You're a magician.
Wait.
And the spiders are, you can find them on YouTube Saturday nights, and that's on Weaving Spiders Webs. And Ben Balderson did
The spiders.
presentation at Flattoberfest.
Yeah.
So they were all at Flattoberfest and got Gordy some merch.
Hell yeah.
So, love you, spiders.
Love you, spiders.
Guys.
Layla, do you have anything going on this week?
Just me and myself and I is all I got. Nope, not jack shit.
Not anything going on. I know I'm looking at a calendar. I start in the real world for the first time in months and months and months next week. So I won't be playing on social media as much, sadly. But no, I'm not anywhere next week.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I guess we'll just be good guys next Friday again.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Work. And that's it, you know?
Awesome, Phillip. Thank you so much for hanging
you.
out. And I
Yeah,
hope
man.
you have decided on which way you want to go out. But until next week, everybody.
Thanks, guys, for hanging out.
Yeah, thank you so much. We love you.
Mwah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Used to think we knew was constantly explore the room of possibilities. Come true, so what we do is call out to the good guys. Good guys. Good guys. Good guys. Which is where those bigger mistakes. Infantailing, calling linguists. Good guys. Forum of decorum needs a secretive society to advance on philosophies intentionally, magically good.